The first item of business this afternoon is a debate on motion number 5319 in the name of Angela Constance on action to support youth employment. I would invite members who wish to speak in this debate to press the request to speak buttons now. And if you're ready, Ms Constance, 14 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer, and Happy New Year to all my colleagues across the Chamber. Today's debate is timely not only as we look forward with hope and ambition to 2013, but also as we look back, reflect on and learn from both our progress and the challenges over the past year. I don't need to tell anyone in this chamber that youth unemployment remains one of the most important challenges that we all face in Scotland and, of course, by other governments across Europe and beyond. It's been my job for the past year or so to put our young people at the very heart of our response to rising youth unemployment, to marshal resources across the government and to harness support from others outside government, others from the business community, as well as from the public and third sectors. If you like, very much to spearhead a national response to a national challenge. Now, the good news is that youth unemployment rate in Scotland has decreased over the year. We now have 25,000 less young people unemployed in Scotland compared to this time last year. And this represents the biggest decrease in youth unemployment since the figures were first collated on the current basis since 2006. The most recent set of employment figures showed that Scotland's progress in youth employment, that we have higher youth employment, lower youth unemployment and lower economic inactivity among young people than anywhere else across the UK. However, just one moment. However, this is not enough. And while all of this is a welcome step in the right direction, there is very much so much more to do, and I look forward to 2013, and I ask everyone across the Chamber to work together to increase our efforts and to strengthen our resolve to do all that we can to support young people towards and into employment. And I'll take Ms Scanlon's point.
Mary Scanlon.
Thank you. We also very much welcome the reduction in unemployment of 25,000. But on the same table, on the same page, in the same statistics, it does, and I quote, and I've checked this with Spice, state that there are 4,000 less 16 to 24-year-olds in employment. The Minister just said there were more in employment. The figure clearly states that there are less.
Yes, there was a marginal reduction in the employment figure. I mean, what I was trying to state, that in comparison to the UK, we are performing better on employment, inactivity and unemployment. But Mrs Scanlon is factually correct to say that there is a marginal reduction in the employment figure. Either, I think from memory serves me, it was either 0.1% or 0.2%. The Presiding Officer, the Employability Fund forms part of the Scottish Government's commitment to supporting people towards and into work. And this fund sits alongside a unique guarantee of a place in education or training for all 16 to 19-year-olds and at least 25,000 modern apprenticeship places in every year of the lifetime of this Parliament, and of course the upcoming £15 million employer recruitment incentive. Colleges are key providers of employability provision, but they are delivering in a period of considerable change, so we are responding positively to their call for stability. And this is why we've asked the Scottish Funding Council to allocate £18 million to colleges within existing committed resources for 2013-14, in addition to the £6 million they will get from Skills Development Scotland. And this money forms part of our £500 million plus commitment to colleges, previously announced in the draft Scottish Budget, reaffirming our support for the work the sector does to help people get jobs. And central to our endeavours, Presiding Officer, as we move forward in 2013 is making the business case to employers that young people can play a strong part in our economic recovery. And this is very much highlighted in Make Young People Your Business, a recruitment campaign for young people which I launched just before recess. Now, this campaign is about changing hearts and it's about changing minds. And there are around 330,000 companies in Scotland of all shapes and sizes. And we have around 86,000 young people in Scotland looking for work, looking for opportunity. And between us, I'm sure we can find ways to mobilise or combine resources and shared appetite to help young people move towards and into employment, giving them hope for their future. And in this, we are not just responding to recession. The Government has undertaken a wide programme of reform, tackling structural issues to drive employment opportunities through reforms to the post-16 learning system and delivering on the promises of Curriculum for Excellence to better prepare our young people for the jobs of the future. And the scale of our ambition is not limited to a return to pre-recession levels of youth unemployment. Prior to the recession, during a time of economic growth, rates of youth unemployment in Scotland were still around 14%, far too high in my mind. And with this in mind, I recently visited Brussels and The Hague to investigate why a small cluster of northern European countries have continued to experience very low levels of youth unemployment during the economic downturn. And I want to replicate this success for Scotland's young people because they deserve nothing less. Now, this Government is ambitious for all of Scotland's young people. Our Youth Employment Strategy Action for Jobs sets out short, medium and long-term actions to support young people and is built upon 3 strategic themes, that being adopting an all-government, all-Scotland approach, enhancing the offer and the support for young people and engaging with employers. And above all, it's a call to those who can effect change, those who can bring people together, provide better solutions for young people who are out of work to do so. As part of our all-government, all-Scotland approach, I've led a series of regional action forums involving young people affected by unemployment in action-focused discussions with local employers, key stakeholders and many of the MSPs that are here today. I've also held a National Rural Skills Summit, a Women's Employment Summit, and last month, in partnership with Young Scot and the Scottish Youth Parliament, hosted a National Employment Summit for young people, which brought together over 100 young people, giving them the opportunity to engage directly with a range of government ministers and other senior stakeholders to identify what measures would be most effective in supporting them towards employment. And these events have given me the opportunity to engage directly with young people and directly with employers. And they have both been clear on how we can help them to succeed. And what they have told me that is that we need a more joined-up skills and employment system. We need more support for employers to recruit young people. Young people want better career guidance, and young people have asked for more high-quality job opportunities and work experience. So in response to this, we are enhancing our offer to young people. Overall, we are harnessing the additional resources across government and agencies up to the value of £80 million to support some 23,000 young people towards and into work. And we've made clear our unprecedented commitment to young people in Scotland through Opportunities for All and have prioritised 16 to 19-year-olds in the 46,000 training places, including the 25,000 modern apprenticeships available each year in the duration of this Parliament. And we are modernising the career services, making them more flexible and responsive to the needs of our young people. And graduates too are being supported by providing them high-quality paid graduate placement programmes. And we are piloting a scheme to offer recruitment incentives to small companies to take on an unemployed graduate. And to support young entrepreneurs, the Scottish Investment Bank has allocated around £1 million for 2012-13 to the Revolving Loan Fund, where young people who are interested in starting or growing their business will be supported through access to loans. And in the coming year, we will build on this work, continuing to respond to the needs of both young people and employers. Now, Presiding Officer, I will continue to engage with employers of all sizes and in all sectors to identify and address the barriers that they face in employing young people. Companies like Stepper Technology, who I visited yesterday, and its sister company, Marine and Engineering Services, have in the last year taken on 22 new employees, of whom 15 are under 24. And Stepper feel that the business community has a social responsibility to ensure young people are employed and well trained. And bigger companies such as Diageo, who are investing £5 million of their own money in youth programmes, know that it actually makes sense to recruit young people. And they are passionate about helping young people to grow and to realise their full potential because they get it. They know that their success in the future will depend on the quality of young people that they attract now, and therefore recruiting some of the best and brightest young people is a key part to this strategy. And through these practices, they can be safe in the knowledge that skills will be passed on to the next generation, enabling companies like Diageo to remain world leaders in a highly competitive spirits industry. And we are responding to help employers to recruit young people. The employer recruitment incentive announced by John Swinney in the draft budget will support around 10,000 young people into work. And our Skills Force will help employers to plan, recruit and develop skills for the workplace, and draws together national and local services. And this has been directly influenced by the feedback received from employers during my series of action forums, certainly.
Kezia Dugdale.
The Minister will be aware that business are very keen that the employment recruitment incentive isn't too strict in its conditions. Can she confirm whether or not it will be focused on 16 to 19-year-olds or whether it will be broader than that when she does release the details?
No, we'll be releasing the details very soon, and the thinking very much behind the employer recruitment incentive was actually to enhance our offer, if you like, to older young people. And of course, by older young people, I mean 18 to 24, because we're very aware that we have, I believe, a good offer to 16 to 19-year-olds, and we wanted to do something to extend our offer to other young people. And it is important, Ms Dugdale's right, that we want something that is easy to use and for business to work with. But we also want to ensure additionality from this use of public resource. And we're working very closely with colleagues in local government, trade unions, and also the FSB to ensure how, in addition to financial incentives, we can actually help small and micro businesses recruit young people, and how we can help them with some of the practicalities. I know that there is demand from employers. We saw in the UK Commission for Employability Skills, the UK Employer Prospectus Survey report published on the 12th of December, that employers in Scotland are more likely than the rest of the UK to have taken on someone under the age of 25 in the 12 months preceding the survey. And the public sector too is rising to this challenge. I've asked public bodies and other agencies to create opportunities for our young people, and I'm heartened by the response so far, but as always there is more to do. For example, Perth and Kinross Council is committed to offering 50 modern apprenticeship places for the next 3 years, and Scottish Enterprise have recently recruited 20 new apprentices with a view to doubling their young workforce, and NHS Tayside is developing a modern apprenticeship in care. In conclusion, Presiding Officer, I want to highlight a proposal from the European Commission suggesting a European Council resolution introducing a youth guarantee across Member States. And this would seek to provide young people up to the age of 25 with an offer of employment, further education or training within 4 months of becoming unemployed or leaving formal education. And I am very supportive of this proposal and feel it is worthy of further discussion, debate and exploration. Now, clearly, public employment services are fundamental to the success of such a scheme. And with this in mind, I have written to the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions to suggest an early discussion on this approach across the UK that will work for Scotland. And just now, Presiding Officer, while we are in the midst of a debate about what sort of country that we want to live in, and I, for one, certainly want to live in a nation with a parliament that has a full range of job-creating powers. But right now, we must all continue with our All Scotland, All Government approach. And I actually include everybody in this chamber in this, because members here are rooted in their local communities. You know the businesses in your area and the needs of your young people. And many of you have already directly responded to this. For example, by hosting jobs fairs or events relating to important sectors in your areas. And I commend these efforts. And I ask you all to do more for the young people in your constituencies in the same way that you urge myself and the Scottish Government to do more. I very much believe in a relationship of mutual challenge, Presiding Officer, because we each must play our part to make young people all of our business and to ensure that we do all that we can to support them through these difficult current economic times. And above all, Presiding Officer, we need to ensure that our young people have hope and ambition for the future, and that they do not become disengaged from society and become just another unemployment statistic. Thank you very much, Presiding Officer, and I'm looking forward very much to this important debate.
Thank you. And would you be good enough just to move the motion, please, in your name? Did you move the motion?
Yes, I move the motion, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much. I now call on Ken McIntosh to speak to and move Amendment 5319.2. Mr McIntosh, 10 minutes, please, or thereby.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I don't know whether it was the festive cheer or our communal New Year resolutions, but the two debates we've had so far this week, in our first week back, have characterised by a remarkable display of consensus on employability. And yesterday, in the oil and gas industry, across the Chamber, we managed to put more emphasis on that which we have in common than on that which divides us. And, Presiding Officer, I can assure you that we in the Labour Party stand ready to make common cause with colleagues from all sides in the face of the economic difficulties that face us, few perhaps being much more formidable than that of mass unemployment. Unfortunately, just as the attractions of those January the 1st pledges to eat a little less and take a little more exercise begin to wear off with each successive visit to the gym, so our enthusiasm to reach out across the Chamber yet again this week is waning. It is not that we doubt the Minister's intent to tackle youth unemployment, but frankly the motion before us today is too complacent to capture either the scale of the challenge or the political energy and drive that is needed to overcome this problem. More worryingly, the Scottish Government's actions simply do not match its words. Now, I'm not trying to pretend that the SNP don't care about unemployment, that they are in the category, for example, of those who believe that unemployment is a price worth paying. Far from it. My frustration is over the lack of delivery. Where exactly is the action that is spoken of in the title of today's government motion for debate? My fear is that we are seeing a return to the party who talk a lot about their good intentions, but who do very little to make them happen. The party of broken promises. The party who promised so much on class sizes and school meals, on the writing off of student debt, but who failed to deliver on any of those pledges. Mr Gibson.
Kenny Gibson.
Mr McIntosh won't be very happy this week after the child benefit changes, but I do thank him for giving way. Is he not disappointed, embarrassed even, that according to evidence presented to the Finance Committee's Employability Report, Table 1, the number of 16 to 19-year-olds not in employment, training or education in Scotland was 5,000 more in 2005 than in 2011, pre-recession and with Labour in control at Holyrood, Westminster and most local authorities in Scotland?
Mr McIntosh.
Mr Gibson actually makes a couple of serious points. One, reminding me that as a father of 6 children with an income between 50 and 60,000, I absolutely have not been happy at the changes to child benefit. However, he's right in identifying the fact that long-term youth unemployment was rising before the current recession, and therefore cannot be put entirely down to that. However, it's been exacerbated by the recession. That reinforces my point that we should all be taking decisive action, that we are absolutely willing to stand shoulder to shoulder with the SNP in tackling this problem, but we don't see enough action, enough evidence from this government. And Presiding Officer, if the SNP can prove me wrong, if they can indeed deliver, Ms Scanlon.
Mary Scanlon.
I think it's only fair, given that Mr Gibson has compared 2005 to 2009 for those not in education, employment or training. Can I compare 2007 to 2011, the most recent date for those figures, and confirm that there are 9,000 more people not in education, employment or training?
So Mrs Scanlon was less charitable to Mr Gibson than I was prepared to be, but she's absolutely right. The SNP's record is one, and this is the difficulty. I find the gloss that the SNP constantly put on figures, selectively quoting statistics, is simply misleading, and it demeans the seriousness of the problem. It demeans the seriousness of this situation, and it also stands as a barrier between us and concerted action across the Parliament. Can I make a little progress, Minister, and then sorry, normally I take all interventions, but I'll make a little progress. Because I assure you, we believe that full employment should be the overriding ambition of this Parliament. And one way where we could start, for example, is by agreeing on the scale of the problem before us, because I was slightly worried by the gloss being put on by the Minister in her opening statement. More than 20% of all young people eligible to work are officially unemployed, and unemployment has risen remorselessly since 2008. We have, in effect, returned to the mass unemployment of the 80s and 90s, but this time with a particularly devastating focus on the young. And as we have heard in our constituency surgeries and evidence to parliamentary committees, in the experience sometimes of friends and family, youth employment is not just emotionally debilitating, with an immediate impact on individuals and on their families. It has a long-term scarring effect on many. As described by economists David Bell and David Blanchflower, unemployment while young, especially of long duration, causes permanent scars rather than temporary blemishes. It creates people who experience long-term unemployment in their youth are more likely to experience unemployment later in life, less likely to earn as much over the course of their career. And the worrying fact is that alongside mass youth unemployment, we have growing long-term unemployment. And looking at the figures here, they are really quite striking. They have risen every single quarter, except for two, since the middle of 2008. What is particularly concerning to me, despite the Minister's figures, is that long-term youth unemployment appears to be worse here in Scotland than it is across the UK. Now, a further worrying feature of this recession, compounding matters and adding... I'll take the Minister.
Minister Angela Constance.
I agree entirely with Mr McIntosh in terms of the scale and scope of the problem, and I'm very well acquainted with Danny Blanchflower's research. And he's right to point out that long-term unemployment amongst young people in Scotland has quadrupled. It's one of the reasons why we're introducing an unemployment recruitment incentive. But I wonder if he would accept that we at least now know the figures of the long-term unemployed, that given that those under the Tory government work programme actually are counted as unemployed, where that actually wasn't the case with those who had signed up to the New Deal. They were actually removed from the unemployment statistics. But it's still too high.
Mr McIntosh.
I certainly think... Can I just say I'm delighted, in fact, to hear the Minister talk about transparency and figures, particularly given the budget process we're all going through now, where we have to seem to wrestle in every single committee to get level 4 figures, to get any information, and where, to be honest, this Parliament sometimes is verging on treated with contempt by the SNP in their access to information. However, if I may also make the other point, I'm not sure whether to mention this, but Danny Blanchflower, I believe, is a former football manager, a great one, of Chelsea in Northern Ireland, and David Blanchflower is. I think the First Minister confuses his football and his bank manager sometimes too. But now, according to another feature of this recession is that of underemployment. And I'm delighted to see the Parliament's Economic Committee establishing an inquiry into this, although Professor Bell's evidence this week that youth unemployment figures underestimate the extent of the problem was very disconcerting. According to Professor Bell, the number of part-time workers, including those who are self-employed, has risen by more than 70,000 since 2008, and this has been matched by a dramatic fall in the number of hours worked by full-time staff. The experience of so many individuals in this situation is not revealed in the official unemployment statistics, but the reduced hours, the move from full-time to part-time work and the loss of overtime is felt in increased hardship. And this has been backed up by research carried out by Citizens Advice Scotland, talking about invisible underemployment, young people withdrawing from the labour market altogether or working in jobs where their skills are not adequately utilised, displacing others. And women in particular are on the receiving end both of the increase in unemployment and of the increased underemployment. Women are more likely to be in low-paid work, more likely to work part-time and less likely to have savings. They face a greater risk of immediate poverty should they lose their job. What this means for families is revealed by the government's own statistics. The most recent are for the year 2010-11, and they show that the average Scottish household income fell by almost £1,200 per year. Now, I hope we can agree on the extent and the seriousness of the unemployment situation in Scotland. And I would acknowledge that there are steps the government have taken which we can agree on. The Minister's own appointment, something we called for, but we should certainly support. The allocation of additional resources of £36 million announced last year. But it is difficult to see much evidence to demonstrate the overall effectiveness of Scottish Government interventions. And we have a deep concern at the government's lack of consistency in tackling the employment challenge. Even in today's motion, for example, I'm unclear whether the government is claiming that the supposed decrease in youth employment of 25,000 last month was due to actions it had taken And if so, can I ask the Minister, what specific actions can she point to? What evidence does she have of their impact? I'm not suggesting for 1 second that the SNP caused the problems we are facing, but I am questioning whether they are doing enough to counter employment and indeed whether their delivery matches their oratory. Most SNP and Labour members are united in opposing the UK Government's policies on the economy, and the SNP are lined up behind Labour in resisting austerity economics and calling for a more Keynesian approach. But there's little evidence that the SNP are backing those words with actions here in Scotland. Rather than mitigate or trying to counter the austerity approach, John Swinney simply appears to be passing on the Tory cut, sometimes making it worse. What I find particularly depressing, for example, is that the Tory government has a target of reducing the public sector by some 500,000 posts, and John Swinney is doing exactly the same here in Scotland. And I would point members to the article by Dave Watson from Unison recently, which points out that we've already lost 50,000 posts in the public sector across Scotland. The majority are in the local government. These are cleaners, caterers, carers, but they're also, because of the real terms cuts in the NHS, they're midwives and they're nurses. And this is not just affecting vital services. This is sucking demand out of the economy. Shall I take it on?
Just draw to a
very
close
well,
gradually,
very well,
please.
Minister, Presiding Officer. I did have a lot more to say, but I want to conclude by pointing out that in their cuts to the public sector, in their cuts to colleges, at a time when young people need opportunities and skills, this is absolutely the wrong steps to be taken. Cutting the housing structure, cutting the housing budget, which has had a dramatic effect on the construction industry, again, has depressed demand at a time when we should be increasing demand. And on colleges, on housing, on rail investment, on childcare, things we can do without actually causing money, there are actions this government could be taking now that would make a difference. And it's time they woke up from their complacency and realised that fine words and good intentions are not enough. Scotland's young people need action, and they need it now. I move the amendment in my name.
I think you moved your amendment, yes?
Amendment in my name. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now call on Mary Scanlon. 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. We very much welcome the estimated reduction in unemployment for 16 to 24-year-olds over the past year by 25,000. We hope that this is the start of a downward trend and an opportunity for all these people to gain work experience, training, skills and secure employment in the future. Over the same period, the unemployment in 16 to 24-year-olds fell by 25,000. As I said earlier, the numbers in employment has also fallen by 4,000. So 25,000 less unemployed, but 4,000 less in employment. And I'm sure there may be a very good explanation for this, and I would like to ask the Minister if she could give us her thoughts on this in her summing up. In the same table, it's also highlighted... Okay.
Kenny Gibson.
Do you not think that unemployment would be a lot less in Scotland if the Tories hadn't imposed a £1 billion extra VAT burden, taken £100 million out of our pension pot, cut our capital budget by 26%, our resource budget by 11.6%, and is going to impose a £2.5 billion cut in the Scottish economy to 2015 through welfare reform proposals?
Mary Scanlon.
I think that unemployment in Scotland, and especially education, skills and training, would be massively improved if there wasn't a 24% cut to the college budget, particularly given that the largest bulk of this cut is to the teaching budget. And I say that as someone that spent over 20 years teaching in further and higher education before coming here. So I think it's time the government woke up, took responsibility for all the powers that they do have and did their best for Scotland rather than constantly blaming Westminster. However, I come back to the same table that we're talking about. It also highlights the estimated increase in inactivity rate from 27 to 31%. At just over 4%, this is 24,000 more people, more young people, deemed to be inactive than a year ago, up from 161,000 to 184,000. Now, again, Presiding Officer, there may be a good explanation for these figures, and I would find it very useful to find out exactly what it is, because as an economist, it does seem to point to quite a serious concern. The motion further welcomes the launch of Make Young People Your Business campaign. This campaign is very welcome. If we're serious about helping young people into employment, then it is right to form good working relationships with the private sector and the third sector, as well as the public sector. Government paper, Making Young People Your Business, is well endorsed by the John Lewis Partnership and others who offer graduate programmes, internships, apprenticeships and work experience. They see young people as a benefit to their business, as the Minister said, by adapting to the latest trends as well as giving an insight into new markets along with their IT skills. Nonetheless, it is disappointing that only 25% of businesses in Scotland recruit straight from school, college or university in the last 2 to 3 years. A more flexible approach is needed, given that so many young people can't get jobs because they have no experience and they can't get experience without a job. The clear message here, as was debated earlier in the week, is to build employability skills. I was surprised the Minister didn't mention the Prince's Trust. I appreciate she can't mention everything, but in my research for this debate, I certainly discovered that they did an awful lot more for young people than I had appreciated. For example, their team programme, teaching young people the benefits of team working. There's a residential course, work experience, and grants up to £500 to fund tools or equipment needed for a job or a course. This could be used for hairdressing kits, carpentry tools or chef's whites, and all very difficult to fund if you're unemployed. And of course the Enterprise programme with workshops, mentoring and start-up funding, and I just hope that the systems are in place for these opportunities to be made available to all those who could benefit. And I think it's far better to start off your working life with a grant rather than a loan, as was mentioned. I would hope that the free vacancy advertising... Well, you may think it's funny to try and help young people into work, but I don't. No, I'm nearly finished now. I would certainly hope that the free vacancy... Can I ask the SNP to stop laughing? I would quite like to be able to continue this debate. I would hope that the free vacancy advertising service, recruitment incentives, wage subsidies, work placements, internships and the fully supported modern apprenticeship programme would ensure a reduction to those not in education, employment or training. The latest figure from SPICE is still 31,000, but it's still based on 2011, and it, as I said earlier, is up 9,000 since the SNP came to power. I would also hope that this figure is falling alongside the unemployment figures, and I think we're probably in line for an updated figure on that point. So I would just finally like to mention the cuts to the college budget. There is no doubt that reducing training places for 16 to 19-year-olds has a devastating effect on giving young people the opportunity to get into employment. So we are today supporting the Labour amendment. We do think it's more thorough, it's a bit more considered. It looks at a wide range of initiatives that are needed to address youth unemployment.
Thank you very much. We now move to open debate, and I call on Gordon MacDonald to be followed by Jane Baxter. 6 minutes, please, Mr MacDonald.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Scotland has over 600,000 people in the age range of 16 to 24, of which nearly a third are students, over half are employed and just under 15% are unemployed. Even when using the international standard of comparing the level of youth unemployment with those economically active, Scotland's rate at 21% is lower than the UK, lower than the EU average, and thankfully nowhere near the levels recorded in summer 2012 of 55% in Greece, 53% in Spain or 35% in Italy. However, 21% is still too high. The Scottish Government, recognising the growing problem of youth unemployment, appointed a Minister for Youth Employment in December 2011 who was tasked with helping Scotland's youth back into training, work or education to secure a strong workforce for the future. At the time of the appointment, we had a higher youth unemployment level than the rest of the UK, and as the Minister Angela Constance said in her speech, we now have a lower level than the UK, and the annual change in youth unemployment rate is dropping faster at 4.3% reduction compared to the UK of 1.8%. Scotland's youth employment strategy outlines the key measures the Scottish Government is taking, including a pledge to deliver 25,000 modern apprenticeships each year over the lifetime of this Parliament, and the commitment to every 16 to 19-year-old that is not in an apprenticeship, in training, full-time education or a job to be offered a training place. In education, the Scottish Government have supported youngsters to stay on at school or college through the Education Maintenance Allowance, and almost 35,000 young people in Scotland are receiving an EMA. Over 60% of those in receipt of an EMA are at secondary school, and the result is another year of record-breaking exam results with the highest ever pass rate for standard grades and for Highers. Colleges are refocusing provision for 16 to 24-year-olds, and student numbers are being maintained at 116,000 full-time equivalent places, despite cuts to the Scottish Government's budget by Westminster. Scottish universities have a record number of Scottish students, with UCAS figures showing that Scotland is the only part of the UK which has seen a rise in university admission. Thanks to the Scottish Government's policy of free education, Scotland is the only country in the UK to ensure young people can go to university based on ability, not the ability to pay. The modern apprenticeship scheme in Scotland is the most recognised of its kind in the UK, with statistics revealing 56% of businesses are aware of the programme, double any other scheme in the UK. This has resulted in a record amount of modern apprenticeships in 2011-12 at 26,427. As NUS Scotland stated in their briefing regarding this drive to upskill young Scots, that we needed to ensure that we have a highly skilled young people in Scotland ready to take advantage of the economy's eventual upturn, investing our resources on productive spend and boosting our human capital rather than on welfare benefits. It is imperative that we have highly skilled young people ready to take up the challenges, as many areas of employment across the UK there is a retirement time bomb looming. The construction skills briefing highlighted that over the last 20 years, workers aged 24 and under in the construction industry has nearly halved from 22% in 1990, while workers over 55 have increased by 65% in the same time period. In the health sector, 20% of GP practice nurses are over the age of 55, and according to an article in the Farmer Times, 10,000 GPs across the UK are due to retire within the next 5 years. The Motor Transport website highlights that a quarter of light goods vehicle drivers are aged 60 or above, with only 1% under the age of 25. They estimate that 48,000 professional LGV drivers will be retiring within the next 5 years. In the food industry, the Sector Skills Council Improve predicted that 137,000 new recruits will need to be attracted to the sector by 2017 to replace those retiring. We need to ensure that our young people select careers where there is the greatest potential for career development. This highlights the importance of the website My World of Work, as it gives everyone 24/7 access to details of different career paths, training availability and current vacancies. In addition to opportunities for all and the modern apprenticeship scheme, the Scottish Government also launched an employer recruitment incentive to help support the most disadvantaged young people to enter the labour market. This supports up to 5,000 new jobs, increasing to 10,000 in 2013-14. The Scottish Government is supporting 1,000 subsidised jobs for 16 to 19-year-olds in social enterprises and voluntary organisations through Community Jobs Scotland. The Third Sector Challenge Fund provides pre-employment support for 800 young people. However, the Government and the public sector alone cannot tackle youth unemployment. That is why in December the Minister for Youth Employment launched Make Young People Your Business, presenting the case for investing in young people, showing how some companies of Scotland have gone about this, and describing some of the support available to employers. A Federation of Small Business survey had 33% of respondents reporting that their business generated enough work to need extra help. With the age demographic problem and the support on hand through the Our Skills Force website, now would be a good time for SMEs to start recruiting.
Thank you very much. I now call on Jane Baxter to be followed by Annabel Ewing. I would remind our members that Jane Baxter is making her first speech in our Parliament today. 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I am pleased to be making my maiden speech today in this important debate about youth employment. Making sure that young people can achieve their potential in education and employment, alongside creating and sustaining job opportunities, must be at the heart of this Parliament's agenda. I am proud to have been elected as a member of the Scottish Parliament to serve Mid-Scotland and Fife. I have taken over this role from my friend John Park, whom I know served his constituents and this Parliament well. I would like to wish him well as he moves on to new challenges. It is my intention to campaign on the issues and priorities that matter for the individuals, families and communities that I have been elected to represent. And so it's a major concern to me that long-term youth unemployment levels are still worryingly high. Young people, by definition, have their future before them. Our task must be to ensure that high rates of youth unemployment do not have long-term negative impact for those individuals, with consequent issues for their communities and demands on public services. I believe that equality of opportunity should not be a one-off, pass-fail, life-defining event, but a lifelong experience. That belief is rooted in my own experience of growing up in Fife, where although I did go to university straight from school, I found that academic life was not for me. I did return to university as a mature student, but my life has taken a very different path to that which was mapped out for me from school. So whilst I believe that young people should have the option of going to university, we need to recognise that it's not the only, or indeed always the best option. Indeed, in Fife, a much higher proportion of young people leave school and go to college, and I know there are widespread concerns about the levels of funding going into further education. So I believe that government at every level has the mandate and the resources to make investments and build partnerships which will first of all create employment and also support young people to gain the skills and experience they need to get and keep a job. Whether that is through capital investment or procurement policies, there is scope to use public money to achieve value for people, and in particular for young people. I want to highlight the example of Labour-controlled Fife Council, where £5 million has been provided over the next 3 years to give 600 young people aged between 16 and 24 years old the chance of a modern apprenticeship with a local employer. The Council is also proposing to spend an additional £1 million on its own in-house apprenticeship scheme. And can I say, if there ever was an issue to unite all the political groupings in Scotland, then working to avoid a lost generation must surely be that issue. And in Fife, the willingness to work together towards this crucial common cause has been shown with the appointment of the senior Liberal Democrat councillor Tony Martin as the Council's ambassador for youth employment, working directly with employers in all sectors, colleges and the voluntary sector to ensure a focus on the challenge of creating and sustaining youth employment. And young people deserve the best chance that we can offer them. I recall working in the 1980s in the Council's youth training scheme to support young people aged 16 and 17 to get the skills they needed for the world of work, and that included life skills and social skills. Margaret Thatcher's government was running the country at that time, and mass unemployment meant hard times for individuals, for families and for communities. And for many young people, this meant a loss of ambition, of opportunity and of hope, a legacy from which some communities are only just recovering. What I learned from that experience, and I believe to this day, is that investment in high-quality training and support will bring dividends to a young person and to his or her community for years to come. The report of the Christie Commission said, we must prioritise expenditure on public services which prevent negative outcomes from arising, and nowhere is this more valid than in creating and maintaining employment for young people. In the 80s, Dunfermline Athletic Football Club was an employer participating in the YTS scheme. The manager, a Mr Jim Leishman, had a gift for inspiring young people and helping them to grow as individuals, whether or not they went on to become professional footballers. I still work with Jim. We are both now Labour councillors in Fife, and Jim is now Provost of Fife, and he uses that position to spread the message of opportunity and aspiration in schools and colleges across Fife. And that's a message I want to get over today. Those of us in public life have a responsibility to do all we can to work with employers, with training providers, with trade unions and with the third sector, making sure that we all have a clear focus on supporting young people into training, into skills and into jobs. So in conclusion, Presiding Officer, I believe and I hope that with clear direction and support from this Parliament, the whole of Civic Scotland, private and public sector, can come together and make sure that the investment and support is in place to ensure that growing up in Scotland will mean a positive, productive future for young people. The alternative cannot be an option. Thank you.
Thank you. Well done. I now call on Annabel Ewing to be followed by Siobhan McMahon.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I'm very pleased indeed to follow the maiden speech of Jane Baxter, a fellow MSP for Mid-Scotland and Fife. I think she made a very thoughtful and interesting contribution to this afternoon's debate, and I'm sure that she will be a credit to this Parliament. I'm pleased myself to have been called to speak in this debate, a very important debate on youth employment and on the actions being taken by the Scottish Government to support getting our young people into work. And I think, Presiding Officer, it's fair to say that there are few issues that could be more important than helping young people find their way in life through getting a job and earning a wage and making a contribution to the society in which they live. And I know that that is what young people want to do and indeed are desperate to do, for it is, I believe, for them a matter of pride. It's a matter of pursuing a particular interest that they have in their lives. It's a matter of them taking responsibility for their own lives. It's a matter for them of proving their abilities, of earning trust and of gaining confidence. And it's a matter of all that just as much as it is for them about earning a wage and contributing to their communities and to society at large. And therefore, I think it is incumbent on all of us to work together to promote youth employment, in particular in these very difficult economic times. And that is what our constituents want us to do. They want us to work hard across the parties to get a result for our young people. We have heard this afternoon, Presiding Officer, from the Scottish Government's dedicated Minister, and I use that in both senses of the word, dedicated Minister for Youth Employment, in her opening remarks of the plethora of activities being pursued by the Scottish Government with a view to improving the employment prospects of our young people. And I think that the fact that there is a dedicated Minister for Youth Employment, the first ever since the Scottish Parliament was reconvened in 1999, I think that speaks volumes about the absolute priority that this SNP government places on tackling youth employment. At the same time, the Scottish Government has recognised that this post must be backed up by resources, and of course we have heard this afternoon about the additional funding of public money that has been allocated most recently for the purpose of tackling youth employment. Of course, at the same time, Presiding Officer, it must be said that for as long as this Parliament does not have at its disposal the full economic powers of a normal independent country, then we are operating with at least one hand tied behind our back in tackling this key issue. But at the present time, Presiding Officer, and in advance of securing the support of the people of Scotland in a yes vote in 2014, it is clear that this SNP Scottish Government is using all the tools and all the levers at its disposal to promote youth employment. And I would therefore have to differ with the interventions of Mr McIntosh, because it is fair to say that without the full tools and levers at your disposal, you are operating with a more limited possibility than if you have full power. And I think that's axiomatic.
Ken McIntosh.
That the SNP have full control over the college budgets and over further education, can I ask exactly how the 24% cut to the college budgets has helped our young people?
Annabel Ewing.
Well, of course, it has to be said that Scotland, and that is the key point, does not have full control over its budget. And I don't know where Mr McIntosh has been recently in terms of the key debate we're having, because Scotland does not control its resources. That is the point. If Scotland did control its resources, we wouldn't be seeing the unprecedented cuts that we are facing to our budget. We would not be pursuing the austerity we would not be seeing the austerity agenda being pursued by the Westminster Government. And, of course, it begs the question as to whether Labour actually supports the devolution of, for example, employment services, or are they content to see employment services, just like, for example, welfare cuts left to the Tories at Westminster to impose on the people of this country, whilst they work hand in glove in an unholy alliance with the Tories at Westminster to place a ceiling on the ambitions of the people of this country, and shame on them, Presiding Officer. No, I'm afraid I would have to make some progress because my time's nearly up. I was interested so much in Mr McIntosh's contribution there that I had to fully respond to it. Many initiatives this afternoon have been mentioned, very positive initiatives, the Opportunities for All initiative, the Modern Apprenticeship Scheme. A lot of work, of course, has gone into making that scheme the huge success it is, and I pay tribute to all those involved, particularly those behind the scenes who have been working very hard, also in the private sector, public sector and third sector, to ensure that these places, these modern apprenticeships, are available to our young people. We have also heard about other initiatives such as the Employability Fund, which is intended to offer more flexibility in responding to actual training needs. We've heard about the Certificate for Work Readiness, and I do hope that the Minister will be able to provide in due course a progress report when it has been, the pilot project has been properly evaluated. In my last 30 seconds, I would like to make two very brief points, Presiding Officer. The first is that, of course, it is key that the small business sector is as involved as possible with these initiatives, and I would ask the Minister in her summing up to outline how we can better involve the small business sector, perhaps via the Make Young People Your Business campaign, which has just recently been launched. Lastly, Presiding Officer, I would say I believe there's a greater role for the third sector to play in local delivery plans. That is the case with respect to the Fife initiative that Jane Baxter referred to, an initiative that has to be said initially pursued by the SNP-led administration and taken on and further developed by the current Council administration. I know that third sector involvement is taking place to varying degrees in different parts of Scotland, and again it would be helpful if the Minister in her closing remarks could provide some further information and clarification about what's happening. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. I call Siobhan McMahon to be followed by Chick Brodie.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I too wish to congratulate Jane Baxter on her maiden speech. I know how nerve-wracking it is, as we all do in the Chamber, and I'm sure she's relieved that it's over, but I look forward to hearing a lot more of her speeches in this Chamber. The sharp escalation in youth unemployment has been one of the most visible and vexing features of the recession. Whilst the overall UK unemployment rate has not exceeded its 1984 peak during the current recession, youth unemployment hit a historic high in 2009 and now stands at 21.1%. As David Bell and David Blanchflower note, although workers of all ages are accepting lower skilled jobs than when the labour market was stronger, the effect is strongest for those aged 16 to 24. Whatever one's age or credentials, scouring the market for jobs, submitting endless applications, attending countless interviews and absorbing constant rejections is exhausting, stressful, discouraging and for some ultimately soul-destroying. This is a predicament in which many young jobless people find themselves. The effect of youth unemployment on future employment prospects and earnings is well documented, and the psychological impact upon confidence and self-esteem should not be discounted. Research shows that young men who experience prolonged unemployment are 3 times more likely to suffer from depression, and high levels of youth unemployment also have a detrimental social impact, leading to increased rates of crime, drug abuse and chronic ill health. It is only natural, then, that as an MSP for Central Scotland, I have watched the rising claimant count amongst young people with a growing sense of trepidation. The most worrying factor within this trend is the incidence of long-term youth unemployment, 16 to 24-year-olds claiming job seekers allowance for more than 1 year, which has increased exponentially over the past 4 years. To take North Lanarkshire as an example, between March 2008 and March 2012, the rate of long-term youth unemployment rose by a staggering 3,367%. Although the upward trend has tapered slightly, the most recent data from the Office of National Statistics revealed that the number of 16 to 24-year-olds claiming job seekers allowance for more than 1 year rose by 137% over the past 12 months. As matters stand, there is nothing to suggest that it will fall to pre-recession levels, certainly not without decisive intervention from the Government at every level. I welcome the Scottish Government's investment of £30 million and an additional £25 million of European structural funds to support youth employment initiatives. However, despite the financial commitments of the Scottish Government, there are some areas in which it has been seriously remiss. One such area, as observed in Labour's amendment, is in the funding of further education. As Scotland's colleges state in their document Shaping a Sustainable Model for a Successful Future, the Scottish Government is consistently failing to recognise the critical roles that colleges play in delivering a successful Scotland. The 24% real terms cut to college funding between 2011-15 has had and will continue to have a severe adverse impact on young people who rely on colleges to furnish them with the skills and qualifications to secure employment or progress to higher education. I join my Labour colleagues in urging Mike Russell to rethink this misguided policy with the greatest possible urgency. Careers advisory services have also been affected by Scottish Government cutbacks. As John Swinney wrote in a recent letter to me, the biggest impact in addressing the occupational choices of individuals comes through the provision of good careers advice. I couldn't agree more. If young people are to progress into good careers and enjoy fulfilling lives, it is imperative that they are given the appropriate advice and guidance. I was disappointed, therefore, to learn that Skills Development Scotland has shifted the emphasis of careers advice from personalised interviews to a web-based service, My World of Work. Whilst there is a place for an online advisory service, it is no substitute for one-on-one interviews tailored to individual requirements. Young people, especially those of school-leaving age, are not always receptive to advice or guidance about anything. At such an early age, it is difficult to appreciate the repercussions that decisions made now will have on later life.
Minister. Can I reassure Ms McMahon that the introduction of My World of Work is a service enhancement and is most certainly not a replacement for face-to-face contact. We are committed to introducing career management skills into classrooms, and I know that she has a very passionate interest in young people from disadvantaged backgrounds, and the purpose of the reforms is to better utilise professional careers management staff to work more intensively and on an ongoing basis with young people that are at risk of disengaging or who have disengaged.
Ms McMahon. I don't actually agree with that intervention, and I think the next paragraph that I was going to will say why, because from the fact that only 17% of young people in South Lanarkshire have registered for My World of Work and 14% in North Lanarkshire, that is clearly not getting across to the young people who need that service now. Delivering effective careers advice is not straightforward, I understand, but it requires considerable knowledge and expertise. The Scottish Government's Youth Employment Strategy highlights the contribution of the voluntary and third sector in supplying the advice and guidance to help young people find work. Last November, I visited the Motherwell office of Rathbone, a voluntary youth sector organisation with over 30 years' experience of helping young people find work. Rathbone focuses on disadvantaged communities and tailors its programmes to suit the needs of both the individual and the local economy. The employees I spoke to exhibited great knowledge, enthusiasm and commitment to their work. I was therefore disappointed to learn that between April and November 2012, Rathbone received fewer referrals from Skills Development Scotland than from the same period in 2011. Given the youth unemployment rose substantially over this period, I find this detail perplexing. Let us be clear, skimping on college funding and careers advisory service will solve neither the economic nor the youth unemployment crisis. If the Scottish Government requires guidance, it should follow the examples being set by local councils. Falkirk Council deserves particular praise. Through its backing Falkirk's Future initiative, it has collaborated with local employers to secure work experience and employment opportunities for young people. Thanks to initiatives like this, it has performed robustly against the generally gloomy outlook. Last September, it achieved a 2-year low in overall unemployment and a year-on-year reduction in the number of 18 to 24-year-olds claiming job seekers allowance. Presiding Officer, we are all aware that youth unemployment is a difficult and intractable problem. With this in mind, I hope the Scottish Government will take this speech and Labour's amendment in the collaborative spirit of all government, all Scotland, and act in the best interest of Scotland's young people. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call Chick Brodie to be followed by Liam MacArthur.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I too welcome the debate today, as it focuses perhaps on the biggest challenge facing us as a community. Presiding Officer, I repeat what I said in the budget debate just before the Christmas recess, that we in this chamber have to lay aside the sometimes cosmetic and sometimes visceral tribalism that pervades these types of debates. The anything you can do, I can do better syndrome and the torrent of numbers does not play well outside this chamber, and certainly does not give solace to, in this particular case, to the young unemployed. And if there are alternative proposals to the government's programme, then I believe it is incumbent that we know what these are, what the costs are, and how they will impact other policies and priorities. I, for one, am happy to think outside the box, to consider other proposals. But what is disappointing, indeed saddening today about the amendment is this. And I don't diminish Labour's, Mr McIntosh's concerns for the young unemployed. I'm sure we all share that. But the amendment smacks of an uncosted, scattergun approach, asking for more but not indicating what will have less. And it quotes... Yes, of course.
Ken McIntosh.
There are a number of costed interventions which we're happy to describe in our budget contribution in housing, rail and in colleges, but specifically childcare and on procurement, neither of which necessarily has to cost much money, both of which the government is supposed to be committed to. Why have we still not seen action on this? The childcare one in particular was in the SNP manifesto. It would make a real difference in getting people back into the workplace.
Well, I thank you for that contribution, but he reminds me of the pessimist who sees the difficulty in every opportunity, whereas the optimist sees the opportunity in every difficulty. So I'd like to see the whole programme that you're costing. The amendment quotes David Bell. Now let's have a look at that. The amendment states quite clearly that long-term unemployment is higher in Scotland than the rest of the UK. It isn't. But higher, it claims, according to the latest claimant figures. So what does David Bell say? What did he say yesterday? In page 3 on the EET committee, and I have the advantage over Mr McIntosh, that I was actually there, the claimant count is no longer the accepted measure of unemployment. And he also goes on to say that the growth in unemployment rates since the beginning of the current recession have been relatively modest and certainly a lot better than most of our European and all of our European counterparts. And so the numbers game goes on. And I know that Mrs Scanlon isn't here. She's probably rehearsing the next set of numbers outside. But, you know, we talk about numbers around colleges, housing, the modern apprenticeship scheme and so on. All threaten, they say, without evidence, to exacerbate the position of the young unemployed. And I say this, we have a duty, an obligation on all sides to say not just what we are against, but what we are for and how we pay for it. Do we find the level of youth unemployment acceptable? Of course we don't. But rather let us debate and quantify what else might be done in the context and the consequences of the resources that are made available to us. Again, as Mr McIntosh said, David Bell highlighted the fact that unemployment creates permanent scars rather than temporary blemishes. And in the face of that, I believe that most of us accept that in the current economic circumstances, the Minister and the Government is laying out plans to mitigate that as best as we can in those economic circumstances. From the opportunities for all, to record number of modern apprenticeships, to employer recruitment incentives, to activity agreements, to community jobs for Scotland and so on, there is a plethora, as Mrs Ewing said, of programmes to encourage young people into training or work. Maybe there are too many. But I do welcome the Make Young People Your Business programme. I believe that is very sensible, because I mentioned earlier the need for us to start to think outside the box. Had fiscal circumstances been different, and they will be, the easier action would be to create more demand in the economy, and hence our cri de coeur very often for a significant stimulus on capital investment in the economy. Presiding Officer, however, circumstances are not different, and I believe it never will be. Tomorrow will never be the same as yesterday in the job market. That is why I believe we have to have a fundamental change, a seismic shift to encourage businesses, particularly a significant proportion of the 335,000 SMEs in Scotland, to be given not just finance, but to be given the business support and experience to encourage them to take on help and to employ young people and build their skills, and then so in the process build their business. That's why I believe in creating also an entrepreneurial spirit coupled to community empowerment through social enterprise in the third sector. And that means us evangelising and taking the message out to the communities, to the young in their communities, in the cities, in the countryside. And that's why I believe that once we have our hands on the levers of fiscal management, we can consider things like pension and other provisions so that we can have people leaving the working population earlier to promote the skilling up of the young and the more mature then skilling down. Given our economic strategy and focus, finally, Presiding Officer, the harsh reality is that we must invest in our young, and while I support the initiatives to date, I think it's time to seek to tip the balance of decision-making, of taking responsibility, of power and of jobs, and tip that balance in the favour of young people. Our young must be inspired to aspire. They are the future.
Thank you. I now call Liam MacArthur to be followed by Claire Adamson.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. Like many in this chamber, I was desperately sad at the decision of my good friend John Park to step down from Parliament. I wish him well in his new challenges, but I think Jane Baxter has demonstrated today that she will be a very able replacement, and I am sure she will serve the constituents of Mid-Scotland and Fife exceptionally well. I welcome today's debate, like others, and the further opportunity it provides to consider the vital issue of youth employment. While the motion is right to acknowledge, and I certainly add my welcome to the news of a recent fall in the numbers of young people out of work, we should obviously guard against any temptation to take our eye off the ball. The number of 16 to 24-year-olds out of work remains unacceptably high at 87,000, while the number in employment has fallen sharply over the last 3 years. Indeed, Ken McIntosh is right to point to the health warning attached to these figures by Professor Bell. But whether our performance is better or worse than the UK seems to change with each new set of figures. What does not change, however, is the need to do more to improve the situation. I think that's accepted by all speakers to date. In particular, as Bernardo's highlighted in their briefing, providing more effective support for those furthest from the labour market is essential. 36% of looked-after children are still looking for employment 6 months after leaving school, almost 4 times the average for school leavers as a whole. The figures for those securing a place in further education is scarcely any better. I'll return shortly to possible options for improving provision, opportunities and outcomes for this group, but I hope the Minister would accept that this is something that does require further attention. There are other areas too I feel need to be addressed, and I'll come to these in a minute, but at the outset, let me reiterate my strong support for the appointment of Angela Constance to her role, welcome the publication and the ongoing development of a youth employment strategy, notably through the local youth action plans, and endorse the continued all-government, all-Scotland focus given to this issue, including the additional ERDF funding. The Minister will know that her efforts in trying to provide job, training and education opportunities for our young people in these difficult economic times enjoys the wholehearted support of MSPs across the Chamber. And I think she's right also to point out the role that we all have, particularly at a local level in our constituencies and regions. In that context, let me outline a number of areas where I do think, despite the encouraging figures, changes in the Government's approach and thinking are needed. As I mentioned earlier, Bernardo's have once again made a compelling case for more targeted action to support some of the most vulnerable young people in Scotland. This will come as no surprise to colleagues on the Education Committee, where our recent inquiry work on improving outcomes for looked-after children has identified alarming evidence of how, despite our collective commitment and efforts by successive governments, as well as those in the field, we are still well short of being able to claim any real success. Bernardo's argues strongly for the third sector to be more closely involved in the development of opportunities for all at a local level, including the youth action plans, and point to, quote, a serious gap in long-term nurturing and supportive provision for care leavers. With care leavers often facing additional barriers to entering the job market, whether through a lack of literacy and numeracy skills, self-confidence or motivation, addressing these obstacles is critically important. It also requires input, often very intensive input from specialists, but the experience shows that this can make a difference. Bernardo's Works programme is just one example, but there are others that demonstrate the value of fully engaging the skills and expertise available within the third sector in Scotland. This is also a theme picked up by SCVO, and I hope Angela Constance will agree to bring some renewed focus to this over the course of 2013. Likewise, I hope she will accept that there is now widespread agreement about the need for ministers to look again at the cuts to college funding proposed in the Government's draft budget. As I say, care leavers continue to experience particular difficulties in accessing further education courses, and it's becoming increasingly clear that the way in which colleges are trying to adapt to the college's funding cuts is having a more pronounced effect on those with specific support needs. Again, this is something that Angela Constance will, I am sure, wish to take up with the co-sponsors of our motion, notably the Education Secretary. But of course, the planned cut of around £34 million to college budgets threatens to have a far wider impact, and one that cannot but work against the government's objectives in terms of youth employment. Evidence to the Education Committee recently from colleges, staff unions, student representatives and business groups all underscored the risk in terms of reduced opportunities and quality of provision. NUS warned that if the cuts go ahead, it would, quote, have a significant negative impact on the contribution our colleges would be able to make in improving employability in Scotland. I accept that the planned reforms can deliver savings in due course through mergers, etc., but as Audit Scotland has pointed out, the extent and timing of these savings remain questionable. Meantime, the loss of staff, reduction in courses and concentration of provision are having an effect, one felt across all age groups, including those falling within the Minister's portfolio. It is important then that Ms Constance lends her support to the now widespread calls for the Government to reverse these cuts. We have seen over successive budgets from this Government that the money continues to be found for pet projects and to grab headlines, even after the budget is agreed. This is ultimately about political choices, and ministers must choose to attach a greater priority to our colleges and those they support. Finally, let me mention briefly the UK Government's Youth Contract Scheme, and I am delighted that this is to be extended beyond unemployment hotspot areas so that wage incentives of over £2,000 will be available to employers across Scotland when taking on a young person who has been out of work for some time. As the Minister suggested, these can help cover the costs of additional training or supervision while giving young people an opportunity to gain meaningful work experience. I am sure the Minister will agree that awareness of these opportunities needs to be properly highlighted in the local action plans being developed. I am conscious, Deputy Presiding Officer, that there are very many areas that I have not covered, but let me conclude by again welcoming this debate, reiterating my support for much of what the Minister is doing in relation to the all-government, all-Scotland approach to tackling the serious challenges facing our young people, but urge her to take on board and respond positively to the concerns that I and others have raised. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call Claire Adamson to be followed by George Adam.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I would also like to congratulate Jane Baxter on making her maiden speech today. I found it a very reflective, very poignant speech and very relevant to where I was thinking about this debate when I was considering what I would say today, because I was one of the original lost generation of the sort of late 70s, early 80s, of the Yopper generation, if you like, who many of my colleagues from school went on to the Youth Opportunities Scheme, which offered a small payment for experience. And when I was thinking about this time, there were a lot of similarities to where we are today in Scotland. We did a period of a Labour administration in Westminster, followed by a Tory administration, and we were moving into a period of very severe austerity and recession. And many of the criticisms of the YOP scheme, I think, sort of cheap labour and exploitation of young people are being laid at some of the current proposals being put forward from Westminster again to tackle some of the employment issues, particularly in Lanarkshire, shortly following that, of course, with the closure of Ravenscraig. And so I saw many people that I grew up with and went to school with and who didn't have the opportunities of education that I was able to take, suffering from that lifetime scarring that Ken McIntosh spoke about. Indeed, I would say there's many bits of Lanarkshire pockets that have not recovered from that recession, let alone are prepared to deal with this one. And it's all the more sad that many of those people will be most hit by some of the welfare reforms that are coming from Westminster at the moment. So, as the mother of a teenage son, and nearly 30 years later, it's very sad that we're facing similar challenges for the young people in Scotland. That being said, however, I am very confident in the work that this Scottish Government is doing, and I'm sure it's doing everything it can to address the challenges facing us due to the economic circumstances. Mr Brodie mentioned in his speech how important it was we as individuals take forward some of these problems as representatives, and it's in the Labour motion as well. And I'd just like to mention Linda Fabiani, who can't be in the chamber today, who this Friday is organising a local event with local businesses in conjunction with Job Centre Plus, which is highlighting some of the additional funding and some of the opportunities that businesses can give young people, many of whom are SMEs in the area. And it includes voluntary work experience for young people, sector-based work academies and work trials for young people. And she's encouraging the SMEs and the businesses in that area to take on
some of these opportunities, and that goes hand in hand with some of the work that the Minister has already mentioned in terms of the job summits that have taken place and the work across the country. I'm also a member of Motherwell College's KT Hub. It's the Knowledge Transfer Hub. It's an organisation that brings together local small businesses and interested parties. They meet once a month for a breakfast meeting, usually with a business speaker of some kind or a motivational speaker of some kind. And I know the KT Hub has been instrumental in actually highlighting some of the opportunities that there are for small businesses and local businesses to work with young people and actually improving youth employment in that area. And I know, Kim McIntosh, it's hard not to think of it always being constantly negative. You used the word complacent in terms of what the government is doing, but it's very difficult to see any complacency when you consider the success of the Modern Apprenticeship Programme. It's not only is it increasing, we've got over 26,000 young apprentices this year. There's a great increase in the number of women undertaking modern apprenticeships, which has to be welcomed. And if this is not enough, the recent survey that Gordon MacDonald mentioned as well shows that it's the best recognised programme in the UK. The Modern Apprenticeship Scheme in Scotland in the UK statistics revealing that 56% of businesses are aware of the programme. This is in comparison to 28% in Northern Ireland, 25% in Wales, and the scheme exists across England, but none with an awareness level above 23%. So that kind of recognition factor in Scotland is fantastic, yes.
Neil Findlay.
I'm aware it's Thursday. What does that matter? It's not the awareness of a programme, it's the fact that people should be engaging in the programme that matters.
Claire Adamson. Well, I believe knowledge is power, Mr Finlay, and knowledge is welcome. I don't know what you will do with the knowledge that you have in your working life. Scotland's Modern Apprenticeship Scheme is most recognised in the UK as a glowing testament to the hard work of those involved in the programme. And getting young people into employment or training is a priority for this government, and that's why they have delivered 26,427 modern apprenticeships and will deliver 25,000 more every year in this administration. The business community have recognised how these opportunities benefit the whole economy, and far more companies are recognising the Scottish system than anywhere else in the UK. The report also showed that establishment in Scotland were more likely than the rest of the UK to have taken on an under 25 in the year before the survey. With the latest employment figures showing that youth employment in Scotland has fallen by 4.3%, it's clear that the Modern Apprenticeship Programme is an important scheme supporting our young people. And that has to be contrasted with Scottish Government paid placements, which are different from the modern-day serfdom, seemingly, that would be implemented by the Westminster system, and shows why it would be far better for all of the decisions to be taken in Scotland. Thank you, Presiding Officer. Thank you. George Adam, to be followed by Neil Findlay.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I welcome this debate, and it's an extremely important debate. I probably have to declare an interest in the fact my daughter is going through that time where she's going through education, hopefully be part of the system of this generation of young people who will get the opportunity to be all they can be with the Scottish Government's support. But one of the things that this time of year does is you obviously do your New Year's resolution, as Mr McIntosh mentioned. And apart from my usual ones, going to the gym, which hasn't been too successful recently, and also watching what I eat, well, this lunch didn't help too much either. One of my other ones was to be more understanding of the opposition parties within the Parliament, because I know you have a role to play within the whole process, and we have to work together in order to do this. But alas, it only appears to be that I'm getting to the end of my first couple of sentences, where I've got to mention that Mary Scanlon mentioned the fact that a grant is better than a loan. Well, I would wholeheartedly agree with that. But would she and her Tory friends in Westminster say the same to the diminishing number of students in England who are paying £9,000 for university places? And the difference, whereas Scottish students pay absolutely nothing. And I believe this is the fundamental difference between this tale of two governments. One that actually focuses on its people and its belief in the positive outcomes for their future, and one that just doesn't care.
Mary Scanlon.
Thank you. I appreciate your common understanding and sensitivity to the opposition parties by giving way. Can I just say to the member, I was reading from the Prince's Trust, And I do think that if you have been unemployed for some time, it must be very helpful to get a £500 grant to get you started, to get you the tools needed to start an apprenticeship, rather than initially being landed with a loan. So yes, you can look at tuition fees, but I was talking about the commencement of work experience or an apprenticeship.
George Adam.
I would say that was the whole point of the government's plans for education in college and higher education in Scotland, is that we're giving young people the opportunity to be all they can and achieve everything they can in the working world, not just picking and choosing things that we actually want to discuss on whatever debate we're discussing now. For me, if I can just move on, Mr McIntosh, for me, politics and our job is about people. And particularly for me, it's about the people of Paisley, which is nothing unusual for yourself. And what we do and the decisions we make affects them and their families. Today, I was at a funeral in Paisley for Jimmy McIntosh, a lifelong 90-year-old St Mirren man and Paisley man, ran supporters clubs for decades, a complete Paisley man to the core, and generations of St Mirren fans and Paisley people and members of his family were there in attendance at that funeral. And the place was a sea of black and white in the colours of St Mirren. But what I will say, during that very emotional funeral, it occurred to me the reason why we all do this. The reason why we're involved in politics is all these people that I saw today who are entrusting us with the future of them and their families and what we can do. And that's why I actually agree with the Minister, Angela Constance, when she says today, we must play our part. Every single one of us must play our part when we go down this road, whether it be a local councillor, as was mentioned earlier on at the local council level, or whether it's ourselves here, opposition, or actual government members or backbenchers in the SNP as well. We all must take our part on this one. And I also agree with the fact that she says we have to make sure that young people retain the hope and ambition for the future, because they are indeed our greatest asset. If we make sure, because I too lived through the 1980s as a young man, I know it doesn't show, you'll all be extremely surprised at that, but I was there when that devastation from the Thatcher Westminster government was there, and that is the cardinal difference between the position Scotland is in now and what we were in then. But the other thing we have to say is Scotland needs further powers. We need the levers of independence and the powers of independence, because there is only so much we can do for Scotland and our future with just the limited powers of devolution. And that is the way, when I look at the people that I saw today, that's what is the reason why I'm involved in politics. That's what motivates me to come here every day to make my arguments with regards to the people of Paisley and Scotland in general, is because we must stay focused, we must stay grounded, and we must look at some of the government's plans for the future and say there are a number of things that will make a difference to many of the people that we represent. College reform will ensure that the FE sector is better suits the needs of our young people, focusing on jobs and careers and ensuring quality for the future generations of young people. This is what the business sector want, because particularly when we were discussing it at the Education Committee, that was exactly what the business sector was saying. They want young people to be able to work within that sector and be able to be all they can be without them having to make any difference. At a local level, the previous SNP administration in Renfrewshire invested in our young people as well. £2.5 million in invest in Renfrewshire to create 800 to 1,000 jobs for all the 16 to 24-year-olds in Renfrewshire. Part of this included a six-figure sum that came from Minister Angela Constance's department as well. So I agree with the Minister that we must all take our responsibilities and ensure that we can deliver for our people. That is why this Scottish Government will not be going down the heartless road taken by previous Westminster governments with regard to youth employment. Presiding Officer, in closing, I mentioned that for me politics is about people and the people we represent, ensuring we represent their needs and protecting their futures. Scotland needs the full levers and powers of independence for us to be able to deliver all of this for our country. The Scottish people have shown their continued support for our young people. The Scottish Government has shown a continued support for our young people in Scotland, and I back them in this endeavour. This is too important for us to play petty politics and constantly hit each other over the head with a metaphoric hammer. We have to actually look at this and say that we get this right for our young people, because we don't want to go down the route of previous administrations in Westminster.
Thank you. I now call Neil Findlay to be followed by Kenneth Gibson.
Thanks very much. Could I also welcome my new colleague Jane Baxter? I enjoyed her speech very much and look forward to working with her over the next few years. I'm afraid this is not good for her, but she sounds like my type of woman. Presiding Officer, this debate is not just about getting people a job, it's about much more. This is an important factor that contributes to making a person who they are, making a family and a community what they are. And unemployment is an ugly scar that blights and debilitates communities. It's quite simply, I believe, a national scandal. And we will not discuss anything more important this year, because we have youth unemployment levels at the moment that we have not witnessed since the 1980s. In my own village, we have youth unemployment at 30%. A level unseen since huge employers like the National Coal Board and British Leyland were butchered by the Thatcher government. And now we're in the middle of another closure, with a local big employer at Halsey Broxburn shedding 1,700 jobs. The First Minister, usually when trying to deflect criticism, likes to talk about people in employment rather than the numbers out of work. So using his own methodology, we can see that whilst unemployment has recently dipped, so have the numbers in employment, and I think Mary Scanlon referred to that. So there are fewer people working, even though the official unemployment rate may have declined. The second note of caution, I think, is the stark reality of what is going on in the real world. The Labour Force Survey exposes the gravity of the situation. Since March 2007, youth unemployment has increased from 51,000 to 87,000. 36,000 more young people out of work under this government. Using the claimant count, the number of 16 to 24-year-olds on job seekers allowance has gone from 22,600 to 35,800 now. And for those claiming benefit over 6 months, the figure was 3,700 in 2007. Now it's 12,275, an almost fourfold increase. And even more worryingly, the figure for those claiming over a year, 555 in 2007, up to 7,050 by November. A 12-fold increase. And yet Mr Brodie doesn't want to talk about statistics. Perhaps most worrying of all, there are still 12.2% of all young people not in education, employment or training. And the last school leaver destination figures showed over 11% of school leavers not going on to any positive destination. And I hope the Minister may respond to this in our summing up. But apparently the school leaver destination figures were supposed to be published in December, and yet we are still waiting. I wonder whether they might be published later this week after this debate. Of course, for those fortunate enough to find work, underemployment is a major problem, and people have spoken about that. Young people are much more likely to have jobs that are temporary, and what the economists at the Economy Committee referred to as dead ends, or as the STUC described them, low-wage, insecure jobs with very little prospect of training or career progression. So with the grim job scene as it is, we should support efforts to tackle overall youth unemployment. However, I have to say to government backbenchers that it is a fundamental part of the job of Parliament and parliamentarians to hold the government to account and ask questions about the success or otherwise of policy. So it's our duty to ask questions, to ask whether the interventions are creating long-term and sustainable jobs, or are they merely a variety, a variety of ways in which to shuffle the figures by creating, as one professional in the field recently described, some of the schemes promoted, holding corrals for the unemployed. Certainly, Mr.
I thank Mr Finlay for giving way and understand the point he makes. We don't also accept, though, it's also the responsibility of the opposition when it's putting forward its amendments suggesting additional expenditure in transport, college funding, childcare and housing, to also tell us exactly where that money is going to come from and where you'd make the other cuts to make that expenditure increase. Is that not also the responsibility of the opposition to behave in a mature way?
I'm sure Mr Crawford took that position when he was in opposition as well, and I'm sure he identified every single penny that he would have spent several times over. I don't think. At this time we would expect our colleges to be the key to the drive to get people back to work.
Yet, as a deliberate policy of this government, college funding has been targeted and reduced, with 70,000 places for part-time students cut, 1,400 job loss and fewer courses available. How on earth is this a sensible policy at this time? The Careers Service, people have mentioned it. We discussed it a few weeks ago, and we heard staff, trade unions and independent academics highlighting how the so-called modernisation will not improve job prospects but hinder them. How can that be a sensible policy at this time? And of course, no, I'm in my last minute. And what of the government's much-championed modern apprenticeship scheme? On the face of it, who could disagree? However, we've introduced this scheme without having any way in which to measure whether it is effective or not. And Skills Development Scotland have written to me exactly stating that, because they cannot tell us whether any of the people who go through the schemes remain in full-time employment afterwards. We have apprenticeships lasting 3 months and 6 months, thousands completed within a year, and young people, of course, are right to take the opportunity, but I believe that rebadging vocational training to call almost anything an apprenticeship diminishes the value of apprenticeships and leads young people on false promises. And what about the Get Ready for Work programme? We've only got 20% moving into full-time employment, and activity agreements where people get a few hours of advice, and that is now classified as a positive destination.
Mr. Finlay,
this is just wrong. Sorry, Presiding Officer, I know I've come to the end of my time, and I'll leave it there, but I look forward to the rest of the debate.
Thank you. I call Kenneth Gibson to be followed by Margaret McDougall.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I'd also like to thank Jane Baxter on a very thoughtful and considered maiden speech, and I also agree that she will be an asset to this chamber and this Parliament. Today's debate focuses on what everyone agrees is one of the most pressing concerns facing Scotland today. Whilst unemployment broadly is an issue the Scottish Government is absolutely focused on tackling, it must be remembered that during any economic downturn such as the current recession, young people always tend to suffer disproportionately in terms of employment opportunities. This is mainly due to the fact that in an increasingly competitive labour market, employers tend to employ those with greater experience and skills, and also during uncertain times, many are keen to hold on to positions they are already in, meaning less flux and opportunity in the job market for young people looking for their first job. It is clear, therefore, that youth unemployment is not a new phenomenon. Indeed, in giving evidence to the Finance Committee last year, the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, as I touched on an intervention to Ken McIntosh, highlighted youth unemployment started to rise actually in 2004 under previous Labour governments at Westminster and Holyrood, long before the financial crash. And during the Finance Committee's recent report on employability, the National Endowment for Science, Technology and the Arts, Nesta, pointed out that, and I quote, the proportion of 16 to 19-year-old NEETs has remained static since 1996. Official Scottish Government figures also show that the proportion of 16 to 19-year-olds not in employment, education or training was actually higher in 2005 and 2011, again, as I mentioned earlier, by some 5,000 people. Of course, unemployment of any kind is a societal ill, but youth unemployment must be considered to be worse. And in the paper, which Siobhan McMahon and Ken McIntosh have already quoted, the increase in the employability of disadvantaged youth, Bell and Blanchflower make clear that at current levels, youth unemployment in Scotland will incur future costs to the Government of £200 million and result in £500 million of lost economic output. But clearly, individuals suffer much more from individual employment. There are many facets to the problems of youth unemployment which must be tackled to address the matter properly, and I believe the establishment of the United Kingdom's First Minister of Youth Unemployment shows how seriously the Scottish Government views this matter. Employability, as we heard in Tuesday's debate, remains an issue of huge importance, and ensuring that young people are well prepared for the world of work is almost as important as ensuring the availability of work, and the Scottish Government has done much to improve matters on this front for Scotland's young people, and I was heartened by much of the cross-party consensus in terms of this particular issue. Our Opportunities for All initiative guarantees all young people between the ages of 16 and 19 a training or education opportunity if they need one. But of course, the availability of jobs is massively important, and with a 26% cut to our capital budget. It is extremely difficult for the government to create and sustain employment as we would wish through investment in major infrastructure projects. And frankly, it's very disingenuous of the Tories to talk and pretend as if a 26% cut in capital and 11% cut in resource somehow has no impact on the ability of employment provision in Scotland. And indeed, we also had crocodile tears for Mary Scanlon in terms of colleges when the Tories and their allies, the Lib Dems, have completely eviscerated that sector south of the border. Of course, there are great hopes for Scotland's economy with investment in renewable potential, which has helped to meet our demands and fulfil our environmental obligations and creating thousands of highly skilled and well-paid jobs. But and we've heard from opposition members that more money should be spent here and there, and indeed housing is one of these areas. And in 2011-12, £352 million was spent by this government building 6,882 houses, helping to create and sustain jobs in the construction sector. And yet, in the previous Labour government, the final year, only 4,832 houses were completed for £562 million. So with difficult financial situation, we are doing what we can to ensure that the construction sector works and that houses are built and that we succeed in the objectives that we have. The Scottish Government is also doing much to incentivise recruitment by businesses, and I was heartened by Kezia Dugdale's comment on Tuesday when she said, and I quote, "I know the Government understands the potential that young people have to offer businesses its own Make Young People Your Business initiative demonstrates that," and also her comments that she welcomed the employment recruitment incentive. A recent survey by the FSB found that a third of all respondents felt that their business generated enough work to need extra help, but only 28% were helping. We're thinking of recruiting into, and the £15 million of funding for the employer recruitment incentive to create up to 10,000 jobs will be very welcome. I was deeply disappointed by Greenwell Finlay's speech, hardly a first. All criticism, no solutions whatsoever, and I think his comments on apprenticeships are something that he should be frankly ashamed of, as if somehow they are worthless and meaningless. The Minister will make clear that, in fact, these are being evaluated and they make a significant contribution to reducing youth unemployment. I would also comment on the fact that our manufacturing sector is not able to produce the number of jobs that it once did. For example, in Ayrshire, between 1997 and 2007, when Labour were in control, of course, at Westminster, the number of manufacturing jobs in Ayrshire fell from 28 to 13,500. More than half of those manufacturing jobs were lost in only a decade, and indeed Scotland lost over 100,000 in that sector. The Scottish Government is by no means complacent, and there is much work still to be done to bring unemployment levels down further. However, it is clear that this Government remains fully committed to making sure everyone has the opportunity to work and play their part in society, and MSPs can also do more. And I'm delighted that the Minister for Youth Employment is attending the Ardrossan Jobs Fair, which I'm hosting on the 4th of February, which I have to say has got very strong support and commitments from employers, providers of education, training and volunteering. And I think that more members should look at what they individually can do to help unemployment in their sector. I'm afraid I'm happy to take it if she's got one.
Very briefly, Margaret McDougall.
It was really just that you haven't extended an invitation to myself to come along to that jobs fair.
Oh,
Kenneth Gibson, and the member must come to a conclusion.
I'm actually trying to invite him. If the member wants to explain how many jobs she's thinking of providing, or where she's going to provide any training or volunteer opportunities, I may actually consider that.
Thank you. I now call Margaret McDougall to be followed by James Dornan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I too congratulate Jane Baxter on her excellent maiden speech and look forward to many more in the future. The most recent statistics for youth employment in Scotland show that it is falling. If we exclude those in full-time education, we find that 21.6% of 18 to 24-year-olds are unemployed, and as Angela Constance pointed out at the Economy, Energy and Tourism Committee on the 19th of December, and I quote, "The percentage of young people in the workforce in the public and private sectors has been falling since 2005, unquote. Both nationally and locally, female young youth unemployment is worse than male unemployment. It becomes a much more complex issue when we take into account young women with children, because they not only have to find a job, but also have to find affordable childcare. which can be extremely difficult if the only jobs on offer are part-time or working unsociable hours. In North Ayrshire, 1 in 8 young people face very little chance of finding employment, and this has doubled in the past 5 years from 6.5 to 12.6, and currently shows no sign of improving. This means that North Ayrshire is the second fastest rising youth unemployment hotspot in the UK, and many of these young people feel they have nothing to aspire to and nothing to look forward to. We must remember that behind every statistic there is a human being struggling to get by, and if we are not careful, many could fall through the cracks. North Ayrshire Council did welcome the one-off £800,000 payment from the Scottish Government last year to help address youth unemployment, but with the scale of unemployment in the area, there is a need for this kind of support to be made on a regular basis. Last year, I attended an event at the Plays in Pennyburn, Kilwinning, where I spoke to numerous young people and heard about their experiences of looking for work in the area and the struggles that they faced. All of these young people were actively looking for work, but were unable to find quality jobs. Many were suffering underemployment, having to resort to part-time and temporary work just to get into the labour market. In some cases, they were overqualified, but they felt that that was the only option that they had left to them. Currently, underemployment is a serious problem within Scotland, particularly among young men. 10.95% of the population are underemployed in Scotland, so I'm pleased that the EET Committee are carrying out an inquiry to explore the impact of underemployment on the economy and the people concerned, and we will hear the result of that inquiry in due course. According to North Ayrshire's most recent area profile, and I quote, "The proportion of school leavers going into full-time higher and further education is much higher at 68.7% in North Ayrshire than for Scotland as a whole, which is 62.9%, unquote. While this is welcome, it is a reflection on the available alternatives out there for young people, because many of them would rather go into work. Worryingly for them, a 24% real terms cut to college places between 2011 and 2015 means opportunities in further education are reducing. So we need to develop an approach which not only encourages young people to go into education, but also makes sure that there are quality jobs and apprenticeships there when they want to join the labour market. I welcome the current investment into apprenticeships. However, more needs to be done on this. The construction skills briefing states that the industry is crying out for skilled young people. They argue that the industry is facing a retirement time bomb and only 12% of construction workers are under 24. So the Scottish Government needs to do more to get young people into trades. Yet the recovery of the industry is being threatened by further cuts to the Scottish housing budget.
John Mason.
I thank the member very much for giving way. I just wonder if she feels that the schools have a part to play in this as well, that maybe are they directing young people in the right direction always for careers?
Margaret McDougall.
Well, I think that the schools have got to play a part in it, but certainly colleges and schools, and we're all working together on this, so it's a partnership. I was also very concerned to read in a recent Skills Development Scotland paper that some modern apprenticeships are only for 6 or 9 months duration. It seems a modern apprenticeship in accountancy lasts for only 9 months. How can that be right? I've been given examples of young people who are apprenticing in call centres under the guise of an admin apprenticeship, supported by a wage subsidy. But in actual fact, all they are doing is making or taking phone calls. Does the government really consider this as a quality apprenticeship? I'm sure we all have examples of young people being exploited by backfilling posts under the pretext of a modern apprenticeship. So I look forward to the government publishing its report on the number of young people who have positive destinations after completing one of these modern apprenticeships. Or are modern apprenticeships simply an exercise to reduce the unemployment statistics? In tackling youth employment, we need to provide more training opportunities by encouraging more employers to take on young people and provide more college places, not reduce them. We need to ensure that these are quality jobs and genuine training places to give young people the skills to fulfil their potential and give them the future they deserve. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call James Dornan to be followed by Alison Johnson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'd like to start off by, like others, thanking Jane Baxter for her contribution. I thought it was a very thoughtful contribution, and I look forward to more over the next few years. I also would like to mention Siobhan McMahon's contribution, which I thought was pretty much the same. I thought it was a very thoughtful and meaningful contribution. I didn't agree with everything she said, but at least it was done in the right spirit, and I welcome that. I also would like to mention Neil Findlay's interjection to Claire Adamson. It's not often that an MSP gets up in the chamber and proudly states that he knows what day it is, but anyway, congratulations. There's no doubt that the issue of youth employment is one of the most serious challenges facing governments on both sides of the border. Just this week, the Prince's Trust published their 2013 Youth Impact Report, and the headline figures are stark and highlight the personal impact unemployment has on the young. Just over a quarter of the young people surveyed believe their future prospects have been permanently damaged by the recession. 1/5 of young people who are not in education, employment or training feel as if they can't cope with everyday life, and over a third always or often feel down or depressed. The report also highlights that 1/3 of these so-called NEETs did not have someone to talk about their problems while they were growing up, and that young people who did not grow up in a supportive family environment are twice as likely to not be in education, employment or training. It's important that we do all we can for young people not yet in a positive destination, because not being in education, employment or training impacts heavily on health and well-being. According to the report, 49% of NEETs are unhappy with their lives, compared to 14% of young people who are in education, employment or training. And that's why the Scottish Government's commitments to its Opportunities for All programme, which does guarantee a place in education, employment or training for every 16 to 9-year-old, is important for the health and well-being of our younger citizens. But it's also important because having young people in the workforce is beneficial not just to them, but to us, and will help Scotland to achieve the modern, vibrant, well-educated and trained workforce that will be at the cornerstone of our economic recovery. The testimonials included in the Make Young People Your Business scheme show that far more can be gained than lost in having young people in the workplace. And I hope the members across the chambers will consider signing my motion on this, which has been marked for members' business. I also strongly believe that as well as businesses working to make young people their priority, all members in this chamber should work to make it their priority too. I recently held a constituency jobs fair last October. It was attended by the Minister for Youth Employment. I want to thank her for the amount of time she took to speak to the people that were there, to the exhibitors who came. I think she'll agree with me that it was perceived as a huge success. I want to thank Lakeside College for hosting it and for publicising it within the college. Also, we publicised it externally through local papers, use of social media, etc. And at the end of the day, we had over 500 people attending. A number of large employers in the constituency, including NHS, GHA, City Building and ASDA, as well as representatives from Skills Development Scotland, Job Centre Plus, and a number of training organisations were there to give more general help, advice and assistance. One of the things, despite what has been said, is one of the most attractive features at it, one of the things that seemed to attract people's attention, was the My World at Work website. There's quite a number of people at it, a lot of young kids to me, they're probably in their 20s or something, but they look young to me, seem to be attracted by this and seem to see the benefits in it. And the feedback I've received from both the organisations and participants has been extremely positive. The participants said that the opportunity to make contacts, find out more about training opportunities, get tips for how to structure CVs, apply for jobs, and about interview processes in a setting that was more informal and less intimidating than the one we're used to, was beneficial to them. I've also spoken to some of them since who have went on to get interviews and hopefully some employment. I'm just waiting for responses back in that. The organisations also saw the benefits. The Jobs Fair was an opportunity for them to network with other like-minded organisations, to speak to people face-to-face that they would only have dealt with through email, and to publicise their employment and training opportunities in a different way, and to have access to a pool of potential workers already showing how keen and committed they are to finding employment or training opportunities. A number of the organisations have been back in touch, pledging their support for future events. I'm also currently in the middle of my second competition for a paid intern. All high schools in my constituency, or where constituents attend, have been involved, and the interviews are taking place later this month. Last year's intern, Campbell, was a great addition to the office, and I'm confident this year's winner will be equally so. Because no matter what the predominant rhetoric of the UK Government is, we know that young people as a general group are not the feral, feckless, work-shy, lazy computer game-playing scroungers that they're made out to be. Or in shameful common Westminster parlance, they're much more likely to be strivers than skivers. We're all aware at the local level of so much good work that young people do for their peers in the community at large, be it through youth groups or churches or in any other number of ways. Indeed, the Scottish Youth Parliament has played an integral role in Civic Scotland in a number of key campaigns over the last year, including their Love Equally campaign for marriage equality, their One Fair Wage campaign and the implementation of the living wage, and their Votes at 16 campaign, because being able to pay tax, get married, start a family, join the army and drive before being able to vote for who leads a country is both unjust and unfair. This government is clear in its commitment to the next generation of Scots, and to make young people your business is just the latest in a long line of initiatives taken by the SNP to show that young people are an integral part of the Commonweal of Scotland. But only the full powers over the economy would allow us to have a Scottish solution to Scotland's employment challenges, and also to ensure that when welfare reform in Scotland, we have our own welfare system, one where welfare is the important word, and not one where those at the bottom of the wealth ladder are forced to pay for the sins of Westminster's politicians, both past and present, and the greed and profligacy of bankers. You know, I've listened to a number of speeches, and I pointed out the ones that I was taken by. There was one or two other contributions which were pretty much the same as we would expect, as my colleague Chick Brodie talked on. And it is incumbent on opposition parties, particularly the main opposition party, if we're going to have a serious debate about the future of our young kids, that they come here and they don't use it as an opportunity to have a go at the government, but use it as an opportunity to put their vision about how they would help the young people of Scotland. And I beg you, it's incumbent on you as an opposition, as what you see as being a future government of this country, to, when you come to this chamber, to come with another plan, not just another plan of attack on the Scottish Government. Until you do, you're abusing the privileged position we all find ourselves in as MSPs, and our young people deserve better. Thank you.
Many thanks. I now call on Alison Johnson to be followed by John Mason.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I too would like to congratulate Jane Baxter on her thought-provoking and well-measured maiden speech. I was one of the young people who took part in the YTS. I was a yopper. And from that training post, I secured permanent employment. So I share her conviction regarding initiatives to lessen the impact of unemployment on young people. This is an incredibly important issue, and I want to focus my time today on disadvantaged young people. Their routes to employment have more barriers than most, and that's even when there are more jobs to go round. At the end of February last year, over 16,000 children and young people were looked after by councils in Scotland, a figure that has increased annually since 2001. 1,408 of those leaving care between 2010 and 11 were between 16 and 21 years old, a young age at which to deal with a major life event, striving to become a self-sufficient adult. And the difficulties of such a transition are evident when we consider that a third of homeless people were formerly in care. On the whole, care leavers have poorer educational qualifications than their peers, poorer health outcomes, and are notably more likely to have contact with the criminal justice system. Many companies, local authorities and other governmental institutions are offering modern apprenticeships. Edinburgh Council recently announced a further 50 such apprenticeships. And there is a particular issue regarding the employment of young people leaving care. Liam MacArthur too raised this issue. And I would ask the Minister to ask that all local authorities share best practice and try to ensure that looked after children are given every opportunity to take up such an apprenticeship place where available, because future life chances for looked after young people are improving where councils are focusing on getting care leavers into education or employment. Third sector organisations like Bernardo's and Action for Children have expertise in supporting young people to maintain college, training and work placements, and funding support for such initiatives is very much preventative spend. Research by the University of York in 2010 showed that every young person not in employment, training or education costs an average of £56,000 to public authorities over their lifetime. DMOS has demonstrated savings of over £90,000 where children in care leave at 18 with good qualifications and good mental health compared to those leaving care at 16.5 with no qualifications and mental health problems. And we know too that 23% of the adult prison population has been in care, and this highlights the need for holistic and personalised employment support for these young people. The Economy, Energy and Tourism Committee have this week started an inquiry investigating underemployment, looking at tackling in-work poverty without increasing overall unemployment. And this issue has been underlined by Bernardo's report this week called Paying to Work. It finds that the introduction of the Universal Credit Benefit System, as it stands, will see a lone parent in part-time, low-paid work actually lose out financially by increasing their work hours because they'll need more childcare. The Scottish Government plans to improve flexibility in hours, and I welcome this help to remove barriers to young parents entering education or employment. This increase in flexibility is urgently needed, and it was an issue I raised during the last debate on colleges. I do feel uncomfortable with the apparent priority that universities have been given over colleges. I'm extremely supportive of the Government's aim to make access to education based on ability to learn and not ability to pay, but it does not sit well with me that universities should be supported while colleges are made to feel the pain of £34.6 million worth of cuts to their grants. Colleges are part of the answer to employability and are essential for optimal youth employability, notwithstanding, of course, the fact that many people would much rather learn on the job and gain work-based qualifications. Colleges are the institutions that can provide the access and flexibility that many disadvantaged young people need. I'd also like to talk about enterprise. The standout fact from the Federation of Small Business briefing this week was that the UK Labour Force Survey demonstrates that between 2008 and 2011, 88% of people moving from unemployment into private sector employment found work in SMEs, compared to 12% in large businesses. It is clear, as the FSB say, that employment in small firms is the most important route to employment for the unemployed and economically inactive. Annabel Goldie touched on this too. Our youth employment efforts must also focus on supporting businesses to recruit and train the right young people, and I would ask the Minister in her closing speech to recognise the importance of micro and small business as employers of previously unemployed people, and to listen to the FSB's wealth of experience with how existing micro businesses can best be supported to recruit young people. Finally, it is important to recognise the enterprising talents of young people who can, if given the chance, become very successful with their own businesses. My predecessor, Robin Harper's last motion in Parliament called on the Government to create a microfinancing scheme for young people, and I'm pleased to see since then the Grameen microfinance model being set up in Scotland, with the potential to help those locked out of the financial system. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call on John Mason, after which we'll move to the closing speeches.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Clearly on Tuesday we had a debate on employability, and it's good to have a debate on a related topic today. As I said on Tuesday, I'd like to spend a little bit of time looking at work experience, but first of all I could perhaps comment on some of the previous speeches that have been made. In particular, a note from some of the Labour speeches, for example, Ken McIntosh saying that he seemed to be critical of the fact that cuts from Westminster were being passed on. Well, absolutely, surely the cuts from Westminster have to be passed on because we ain't got anywhere else to get money from. Also, we've had a series of speakers, including the motion. Oh, straight in, right, OK.
Ken McIntosh.
The point I was making, Mr Mason, which perhaps you can address, is that Westminster have a particular agenda, which is to cut the public sector. There is absolutely no need for the Scottish Government to follow the same agenda. Can you explain why the Government is cutting the public sector as drastically and not protecting public employment in Scotland?
John Mason.
Well, I missed some of the detail of that because my fellow backbenchers were heckling you, but the first point of there is no need for the Scottish Government to pass on Westminster cuts. There is nowhere else for the money to come from. We have to pass on the Westminster cuts. The question then is how we do it. And I think the point has been made that in the Labour amendment especially, that we're looking for more money for colleges, more for housing, more for transport, all of which we all support, and there has been no suggestion from Labour, or I think from the Tories or Lib Dems, as to where that money should come from. I do have to give credit to Alison Johnson, who suggested that actually we could trim the university funding to give more to the colleges. Is that what Labour are saying, or are Labour just saying it's got to come out of thin air? Okay.
Two suggestions. First of all, the Rail Improvement Programme, you can borrow from the real asset base, and I'd like to ask the SNP why they're not doing so. And secondly, why have the SNP cut their own private finance initiative by £330 million? What's wrong with actually using that to get shovel-ready projects off the ground?
John Mason.
Well, the second one first, traditional funding, and preferably saving, which we should have been doing for many years, is what we should be using for capital projects primarily. On the railway system, if we can run 8-coach trains from Queen Street to Edinburgh for cheaper than running more 6-coach trains, which are harmful for the environment, then I support the 8-coach trains and the cheaper option. To continue with other people, I do agree with Mary Scanlon, grants are better than loans. That applies to students, it applies to the Prince's Trust, it applies to the Social Fund. Grants are better than loans, full stop. Jane Baxter, I must say, agreed with the fact that universities is not the right point for everybody, not the right way for everybody. And I also was interested in Neil Finlay's criticism of Claire Adamson, that she was only describing the problem, and then he spent 6 minutes describing the problem. Work experience, which is what I said I would like to spend a bit of time on, was mentioned in Tuesday's debate, and I do welcome the report that most employers taking on young people find them ready for work. Yet there's still a perception or a real problem that many lack experience. So I very much welcome the intentions of SDS Make Young People Your Business campaign to encourage employers to help young people build up their skills. This came up a number of times at the Finance Committee as we were looking at employability, and overall I think the feeling was there was room for improvement. Schools may be encouraging a one-week placement, and I have had a number of youngsters in for a week, and I've got one coming in next week. But there can be a few hoops to go through. For example, in our evidence session, Mingus Hotel said, recently Glasgow City Council surveyed the hotel for a work placement, and in its paperwork it probably went into more detail than the environmental health officers go into. The person in question was not allowed to pull out a bed, touch anything in the leisure club, or do this, that or the other. And when we had an inspection on Monday this week, we were told the pupil must not use cleaning materials at all, and there was a question of whether the office was warm enough, as if it might not be, which it sometimes might not be. Okay. Now, of course, schools have to be responsible where they let the pupils go to, but I do wonder if sometimes they're making it too difficult for employers. And yet, even a one-week placement is very little. It would be difficult to say that either the employer knew the young person well or the young person understood the job to any great extent. And I think this is not just a problem for school pupils, but can be for graduates as well. They can't get a job or even an interview because they have no experience, yet taking on an unpaid intern for a year, I do agree, can be considered exploitation. So what is the answer to that? And the motion does refer to us being involved, and I think we can also be involved because we are employers. We are all here small employers. We can set an example. And I have been trying to think of some of the things I could do, and one thing I did during the autumn was to take on a graduate who had no experience but needed that experience. I decided to set the limit at 120 to 150 hours so that that would not be considered exploitation. But I think that gave that person a reasonable experience, and we can then write a reference for him to go elsewhere. I would just want to say, too, that it has to be real work experience. There has been some coverage recently that the DWP and Job Centre Plus have actually been encouraging employers to change real jobs into work experience in order to meet their targets. Allegedly, one nightclub in Glasgow took on 40 youngsters for the busy November-December season, had them working unpaid from 7 p.m. to 3 a.m, and eventually only took on 3 of them as actual employees. This is not right, and I did raise it with one of the agencies who work with the DWP when I visited them recently, and they also said they had refused to take part in some of the schemes which they felt were dodgy. So in conclusion, Presiding Officer, we all want to do more within the limitations that we have. I believe we can do more and we will do more, but we could do a lot more if we were independent. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We now move to closing speeches, and I call on Liz Smith to close for the Conservatives a generous 6 minutes.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I think there have been some very interesting points raised in this debate, and I think there's been an interesting tone, because I think the tone is important, as is the context in which we are discussing a lot of these issues. And I think several members have raised the fact that this is on top of other debates that have a coherency with this one. And I think that's very important, because we all do have a responsibility to tackle youth unemployment. We also have the responsibility to focus on the employability issue, because that, in essence, is really the main part of what we're talking about, just as Mary Scanlon set out with, I think, the statistical facts to prove that. She's absolutely right to say that there are some signs of progress, and it would be churlish to diminish these signs when looking at the overall picture. But what remains very clear is the considerable gap between the demand and supply within the different aspects of the labour market, not just in the total numbers, but in the terms of the qualitative adjustments that are required. And I was very struck by the comments that were made all round the political spectrum, from Chick Brodie, Liam MacArthur, Ken McIntosh and Siobhan McMahon, about the need to drill down on some of this, because we can't just come out with blanket statements. Apart from the underemployment issue, which Ken McIntosh rightly raised, there are three main problems. First, there are those who are willing and able to work, but who are unable to find work in an economy which is obviously demand deficient just now and prone to some very serious cyclical downturns. Secondly, there are those who are willing and able to work, but who cannot find a job because they do not actually possess the relevant skills and qualifications to make them sufficiently attractive to employers who do actually have jobs available. And then there are those who are able to work, but who for one reason or another are unwilling. Now, each of these situations encompasses different problems within the labour market, and by definition they require different attention from any government. So when we examine just exactly why it is that under half of 16 to 24-year-olds in Scotland are currently unemployed, and why the unemployment rate continues to be far too high, it is very important to look at the underlying trends, and important that policy focus distinguishes on the different types of unemployment. Now, several members have said in their speeches that there are many factors at work, and that is right. One concern that has consistently been raised, and I think this comes through in almost every committee in this Parliament just now, is the very consistent theme amongst employers when they make representations to us as parliamentarians, is the concern about the lack of employability skills amongst too many, by no means all, but too many of our young people. And they're saying that too many school leavers often have poor communication skills, a lack of understanding about the ethos that is expected and required in the workplace. And while they acknowledge that there are some outstanding programmes to address this, including many within the voluntary sector, and we've talked about the Prince's Trust, time and again they're making the point that the policy is not sufficiently coherent across the country. Now, obviously, there is a wealth of evidence on this topic, but whether you take the very sophisticated economic analysis that's produced by the CBI or the very sophisticated social analysis produced by Bernardo's, there are deeply worrying signs that the number of personal barriers in the way of too many young people is really a very serious issue. And that can obviously include poor literacy and numeracy, the lack of the confidence and the motivation that is required, issues that relate to housing, to money management, and just as importantly, as I say, being able to understand what is actually required of them. I think it's very clear that an increasing number of commentators believe that schools and colleges have the most significant role to play in tackling this problem. The Scottish Chamber of Commerce told the Finance Committee recently that a great deal more needs to be done to improve the links between employers and schools and colleges, and that much more can be done to raise the expectations of young people. And can I just say and add my congratulations to Jane Baxter, who I thought made a very thoughtful contribution in her maiden speech. I think that's a point that she was making very strongly, is that the transition between school life and working life is the most important one. And those of people who were able to attend the colleges and universities, the cross-party group just before Christmas, when we examined the issue of articulation, I think we were all very struck by the contribution of Chantal Robson, who was a classic example of how important successful articulation can be. A young lady who was in her first job and who was very clear that had she not fallen lucky to some very beneficial advice, she would probably not have succeeded. And her argument was very strongly that careers guidance at school, particularly S3, she was saying, had to be so much better. And there's a message to... Yes, of course.
John Mason.
I'm interested in what the member's saying, and I think she's right. And I just wonder if she's got any suggestions how we can improve that. I mean, should we be getting teachers more out into the workplace? Should we be getting business people, work people more into the schools?
Ms Smith.
I think the member asks a very important question, and if I was to take on board what this young lady was saying to us, is that it has to be a mixture of some of these things. She was arguing that teachers had to have additional qualifications to help them understand some of the problems that they face, but nothing beats the experience, and you yourself in your speech, the member said quite rightly how important it is for people like ourselves to offer some of that valuable work experience. So I think it's a combination of things, and I don't underestimate just how important that is. And that's again something that the Smith Group, I think, put before this Parliament too. Presiding Officer, can I just finish on what I do see as a crucial issue and why I have great sympathy for the Labour amendment, and that is on the question of colleges, institutions which I believe are absolutely central to this issue. And I ask the Scottish Government again to reflect on how it can possibly justify the extent of the cuts that have been imposed on the college budgets. These are cuts that are punishing the very institutions which have, to a large extent, had the greatest impact on providing better and more flexible employment opportunities. So why on earth, at this time of such high youth unemployment, why are they ones that have to be punished? Deputy Presiding Officer, thank you.
Thank you. I now call on Angela Constance to wind up. I beg your pardon, on Kezia Dugdale. I need to put my specs on.
I'll quite happily have the last word, Presiding Officer.
A generous 8 minutes.
Before I seek to close the debate this afternoon, can I take the opportunity to congratulate Jane Baxter on an excellent maiden speech. The strength and depth of her experience is self-evident, and I think her speech served as a timely reminder that we do have a public duty as politicians to do everything we can to help young people into work. And that timely reminder burst through some of the rhetoric and the backslapping that we've heard this afternoon. One thing that Jane didn't list from her impressive CV was the time that she spent as a youth club leader in Dunfermline's Abbey View, a pretty rough area back in the 1980s, full of unruly, challenging and cheeky young people, the worst offender of which I understand was a young John Park. So she's got a lot to be responsible for. The truth be told, Presiding Officer, I hadn't actually met Jane until her election, but since then we've had a couple of occasions to put the world to rights, and I've thoroughly enjoyed that. And I know that she'll not only make a great parliamentarian, but will be a good friend to many people across the chamber. Moving on, Presiding Officer, when I saw the title of today's debate just before Christmas, I thought, great, the word action finally appears in a Scottish Government motion. No talk of strategies or consultations, but action. I assumed that we'd hear more detail about the Government's employment recruitment incentive, a long-standing Labour policy, one we've been calling for since the Minister's appointment, and I was pleased to see it in the budget. And I understand it will be on stream from April. But surely today would have been the day to tell us more about it. 3 months ahead of it coming on stream, plenty of time for business to get its head around the detail. Perhaps even plenty of time to find it, and I'll come on to the complexity of the employability landscape shortly. But let me say to the Minister, I am pleased to hear that the employment recruitment incentive will be focused on 18 to 24-year-olds, because I remain increasingly concerned about the focus on 16 to 19-year-olds. Having met a 20-year-old guy in Westerhill's Job Centre recently who was desperate to be a mechanic and told that he was too old for government help. That's not just one story, but a depressingly regular trend, Presiding Officer. Latest figures show the unemployment rate for 20 to 24-year-olds is on the rise, going from 8.9% to 17.7% in the last year alone. And I say to Kenneth Gibson, perhaps he would be less enthusiastic about the Opportunities for All proposal, which of course focuses on 16 to 19-year-olds, if he looked at the statistics in his own constituency, where the number of 20 to 24-year-olds out of work is 33.6%, almost double the national average. A generation of young people written off for not being young enough. Of course.
Can you do some of that, which is why I've organised a jobs fair, unlike any of your own members, as far as I'm aware, in the West of Scotland region. But I mean, the point is, do you not share my disappointment that under the last Labour government, 14,500 manufacturing jobs were lost in Ayrshire, more than half the total?
Kezia Dugdale.
So it's all Labour's fault. We're back to the blame game, presiding officer. But let me say, Margaret McCulloch, who isn't here today, has had a jobs fair that I'm aware of, and she's made a number of speeches in this chamber about that. And I know she's not alone from the Labour benches. But surely the member would prefer his government was taking the action rather than him having to set up his own jobs fair in his own constituency. I commend him for his action, but surely you'd like his government to do the same. I mentioned the young guy in Wester Hailes, presiding officer. Wester Hailes is, of course, in Gordon MacDonald's constituency, and I admit to being truly shocked by his Everything's Rosy speech this afternoon. He might have thought that speech went down well on his front bench, but it wouldn't have gone down particularly well in Wester Hailes Job Centre, let me tell him that. And he also made a big play about the importance of free higher education. He should take no joy in free higher education in his constituency when it's coming at the expense of college places. Let me tell him that just 3 kids from Wester Hailes went to university in 2010-11 under his government's free education policy. It's a classic case in point of free tuition contributing little to widening access in higher education. And let me tell him it's his government that's cutting £900 from the bursaries of the poorest students, and I bet you they came from Wester Hailes. Far from improving widening access, his government are ruining the chances of kids in his constituency going to university. No, I'm not done yet, Miss Ewing, I'm afraid. 38 kids in Wester Hailes went to college in 2010-2011. The member should look at the statistics. And what of it now? A fall of 79,000 student places since 2008 under this government. If you live in Sight Hill, presiding officer, you can see Stevenson College across the road, but you can't get in the door. I thought that was a truly shameful speech from the member. Members of scaremongering, I have the school leaver statistics on the desk. I can share them with the Minister afterwards. I'd rather not, if that's okay, Mr. Finlay. I've got a lot to get through. Mr Gibson, however, was right to point to the fact that I welcome the government's Make Young People Your Business document, and I spoke at great length on Tuesday as to how much I welcomed that. I think it's particularly important that we say to businesses, it's not about a moral duty to employ young people, it's about the opportunities they give you to build and grow your company. I completely welcome that. What I want to see is more emphasis put on getting that message out to businesses. I don't want this to be a glossy leaflet that sits in a council office for businesses to rush by and not be able to pick up. So we need to make sure that message is getting out to businesses. I heard the Cabinet Secretary earlier this week talk about a website dedicated to promoting this called Our Skills Force. So I've looked at that website since Tuesday, and I'm afraid it carries many of the same problems that My World of Work does. And let me share them with the Minister, because I hope if she takes one message away from today, it's to look into this. The Minister and I shared a platform just before Christmas, not about youth unemployment, but about sexism, about gender equality, and on that we had a lot of views in common. If you look on the front page of this website, presiding officer, there are 10 photos, 9 of which are of young men, just 1 photo of young women. I'm sure that the Minister will go away today and maybe look at just the presentational impact that has. But there's also a page there about recruitment, a message for business on how to access government programmes. That page, that one website page, still has 4 different contact telephone numbers for businesses to access support. Once again, businesses are faced with the complexity of the employability landscape. Surely 1 telephone number would have been enough. And what's worse, presiding officer, I thought, right, how would I feel about a business? If I was a business, how would I access support to youth recruitment? So I googled the words, help recruiting a young apprentice in Scotland. That website doesn't come anywhere in the first 10 listings on Google. So I tried again and I googled the words, Our Skills Force Scotland. Again, it doesn't appear in the first 10 listings on Google. How are businesses going to access this website? How are they going to find the support if it doesn't come up? I ask the Minister to seriously think about this approach from a business's perspective. How can they access the information and how can they make the best of it? It's no use it just being a glossy document. In the time I have left, presiding officer, let me tell you why Labour cannot support the government today. We do support an all-government, all-Scotland approach, but we don't think you're doing enough. Where is the report on what the government agencies are doing to tackle youth unemployment? Do they have their own strategies? What are government departments doing across the board? How are you taking best practice from different local authorities and sharing it across the country? The other big factor is the statistics, presiding officer. Of course we welcome the fall in unemployment, but we can't help but point out the fact that when the figures are rising and when they were over 100,000, this Minister said, I can't do anything about it, I need the economic powers. When the numbers numbers are falling, she's claiming the credit for it, as if it was all her own work. I'm afraid I've only got a matter of seconds left. In fact, I'm over my time, Mr Brodie. I'm sorry for that. I believe, Presiding Officer, that we have supported every youth employment motion that's come from the Government so far to date, but our patience has worn thin. Today will be the day that we break that, and I'm afraid it's the lack of action and the hypocrisy of the way this Government has treated the statistics which has led us to the position where we cannot support them today. I therefore support the amendment in Ken McIntosh's name.
Thank you very much. I now call on Angela Constance to wind up the debate. On behalf of the Government Minister, you have until 5 o'clock.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Can I also add my congratulations to Jane Baxter on a very eloquent maiden speech. I listened with interest to the activities that her colleagues in Fife Council were supporting, in particular the appointment of a youth ambassador. She might also be interested to know that North Lanarkshire Council have also appointed a youth employment ambassador, and that youth employment ambassador, North Lanarkshire, even attended Alec Neil's jobs fair in his constituency. I was also quite thrilled to hear her talk about Jim Leishman and her contact and work with Jim. I am obviously known to Jim from his days at Livingston Football Club. And far be it from me, I don't want to cause any problems in the ranks and files of the Labour Party in Fife. And I do hope that Jim will forgive me for this. But he did speak at a fundraising dinner on my behalf that I had before I was elected in 2007. And you, of course, can take back to Fife, Jane Baxter, my best wishes to Mr Leishman and for all the work that he continues to do. I hope Mary Scanlon will forgive me. We did get a little bit of light relief when she gave her grants not loans speech. I have to say that Alistair and Alan and I looked at each other and thought, where was Mary Scanlon in the late 1980s when we were fighting the Thatcher government about the introduction of student loans? But anyway, I think she's kind of clarified her position on that one. But can I also just, and a more important point is reassure Mary Scanlon that there is no reduction in training places for young people. Of course, modern apprenticeships are up. We have delivered our commitments to the National Training Programme, and that also in terms of colleges, 70% of provision will be in accordance with outcome agreements targeted at 16 to 24-year-olds, and that's actually a 5% increase. But where there is a genuine point that Liam MacArthur and others raised is actually with regards to looked after children, because we have to ensure that looked after children get their fair share of opportunities, whether it's in terms of national training programmes or whether it's in terms of our modern apprenticeship programme. And of course, the third sector have an invaluable role in working with young people that are furthest away from the labour market. And I'm very familiar, no thanks Mary, I'm very familiar, I've moved on, I'm very familiar with the work that Bernardo Works do. In fact, I visited Bernardo Works in my own constituency on Thursday and know the work that they do in linking up with employers and reaching out to some of the most disadvantaged young people in our communities. And I have to emphasise that one of the reasons that the Government funds the modern apprenticeship programme in every framework between the ages of 16 and 24 is, amongst other things, a recognition that quite often a care leaver may not be ready to participate in a modern apprenticeship between the ages of 16 and 19, and that they may actually be in their 20s. But the point that I think that one of the children's charities raised in their briefing, that we need to do more, and that's certainly a point that Alison Johnson raised, is that we need to do more to promote the modern apprenticeship programme amongst all children and young people. And people might be interested to know that the Scottish Children's Reporters Administration is a good public sector employer that leads by example in terms of employing looked after children. But I accept there is much more, and as we go into 2013 we as always, must seek to raise our game in terms of looked after children. Yes, positive outcomes, positive destinations for looked after children have increased from 44% to 55%, and that's in terms of sustained destinations, but that is still quite simply just not good enough. Now, in terms of Mr McIntosh's contribution, can I say to him, I think we do agree on the scale of the problem. We know and understand what David Blanchflower talks about in terms of the scarring, in terms of the lifelong, the life-changing impact of youth unemployment. And I would share your concerns on long-term unemployment. It's why we have introduced, amongst other things, an employment recruitment incentive. I would share your concerns about underemployment. Underemployment is an issue for young people. It's bad for our economy. It's an issue for women workers. It's an issue for some graduates. And, of course, like others, I look forward to learning more about the Economy, Energy and Tourism Committee with regards to that specific inquiry. And I will agree with them of the importance of capital investment. Every £100 million of capital investment relates to 1,400 jobs. And yes, the challenge is to ensure that when we do get economic growth, that our young people are given the opportunity to benefit from that economic growth. And that is where procurement comes in. And I had began work with Mr Neil on the Sustainable Procurement Bill. This is an all-government approach, and that work will continue. It's in the legislative programme, and that work will continue with Ms Sturgeon. And when it comes to housing, I know it was mentioned in your amendment, didn't say much about it in the debate. All I'm going to say is when it comes to housing, our record is better than yours. Absolutely. And perhaps just now and again, Mr McIntosh and others could just, with a bit more good grace, acknowledge the positives, because the issue here is that we cannot allow ourselves, whatever the scale of the challenge, to succumb to a cycle of despair. We have to be giving out a very strong and clear message that whatever the scale of the challenge, that we will strain every sinew to tackle that challenge, and we must tackle that message of despair. We must ensure that our young people continue to receive a message of hope. And I just would have, I suppose, been much more reassured by the opposition if they had had, more of a good grace to welcome the recent drop in youth unemployment, 25,000 less young people unemployed this time of the year than a year ago. And by God, I know this is no time for us to be taking our foot off the pedal, but it is a welcome step in the right direction. And he talks about action. Well, in terms of securing an all-Scotland, all-government response, we have identified, as part of our ongoing work, an additional £80 million that will assist 23,000 young Scots towards and into work. And he talks about evaluation. Yes, evaluation is important. We had a debate with regards to this on Tuesday. But they never say which programme isn't working. They never say which programme they want to improve. They never say which programme they would scrap. And what I will say in terms of our national training programmes deliver a good job, but they can do much better, and that's one of the reasons that we are moving towards an employability fund to ensure that we move away from this one-size-fits-all, that we have pre-vocational training, pre-employment training that actually meets the needs of young people, including those young people most disadvantaged and far removed, and actually meets the needs of local economies. So I would have hoped that there would have been some cognisance of record levels of modern apprenticeships, of the employment recruitment initiative, there was some, and of initiatives such as Community Jobs Scotland, and of the Third Sector Challenge Fund. There is a plethora of action that we are having to take. And Bruce Crawford also raised a very sensible point, that the opposition actually never say in their proposals for additional expenditure how they're going to pay for it. Well, I very much believe in social democracy, but I also know that you have to be able to pay for it. One of the good things about today's debate is that we have, I think, clearly in a consensual manner, articulated that there are very much three strands to tackling youth unemployment. There is what we can do as individuals, and we've heard about the jobs fair. I've had one myself in my own constituency. James Dornan had a hugely successful jobs fair. I know that Labour members have also organised activities in their own constituencies with a view to addressing issues that are relevant to their local needs. But I really do urge all members to get behind and promote in their constituency opportunities for all and the helpline, to promote our modern apprenticeship programme, to really get behind Make Young People Your Business campaign, and yes, to really promote the employer recruitment incentive among small business, because that's where it's targeted. And one of the changes that we've known that has occurred over the past decade that has adversely affected young people in the labour market is the reduction of large business and the rise in small business. The small businesses invariably want to recruit tried and tested, and there are other structural changes in the labour market that have had an adverse impact on young people. We need to create more entry-level jobs. That ladder of opportunity has been taken away from many school leavers who have reasonable qualifications. But in the time I've got left, Presiding Officer, I just want to focus that we need economic and structural change to tackle youth unemployment. And there is a case for structural reform in terms of the early years, curriculum for excellence, colleges and, yes, career guidance. And we are having to make very tough decisions now in response to Tory cuts and adversity. But we are also reforming public services in terms of prevention and early intervention. And I would hope that all members in this chamber would unite behind the call and the need to support the European Commission's proposal for a youth guarantee to all young people up to the age of 25, that within 4 months of unemployment that they can secure a place in education, a job or further training. I think that's something very positive that we could be engaging with the UK Government to achieve, and I would like to, I hope, achieve people's support. Because, Presiding Officer, change always happens. And when we look at the NEET rate, when we look at youth unemployment at a time of economic growth, we need change. And can anybody look at me in the face and say that we don't need change? There are other countries in Europe who, despite an economic recession, have youth unemployment levels of less than 10%. So in conclusion, Presiding Officer, I commend the good work that has taken place, and that we should celebrate the reduction in youth unemployment as a step in the right direction. But we can assure this Parliament that we most certainly will not be taking our foot off the gas, and we will indeed be striving for a Parliament that has a full range of job-creating powers.
Many thanks. And that concludes the debate on action to support youth employment. It's now time to move to the next item of business, which is consideration of 2 parliamentary bureau motions. I would ask Joe Fitzpatrick to move motion numbers 5336 on committee membership and 5335 on substitution on committees.
Moved on block.
Thank you. The questions on these motions will be put at decision time, to which we now come. And there are 4 questions to be put as a result of today's business. The first question is that Amendment 5319.2 in the name of Ken McIntosh, which seeks to amend motion number 5319 in the name of Angela Constance on action to support youth employment, be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are not agreed. The Parliament therefore will move to a vote, and members should cast their vote now. The result of the vote on amendment number 5319.2 in the name of Ken McIntosh is yes 53, no 63. The amendment is therefore not agreed. The next question is that motion 5319 in the name of Angela Constance on action to support youth employment be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. We are not agreed. Therefore, we will move to a vote and members should cast their vote now. Result of the vote on motion number 5319 in the name of Angela Constance is yes 67, no 34. There were 15 abstentions. The motion is therefore agreed. The third question is that motion number 5336 in the name of Joe Fitzpatrick on committee membership be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. The motion is therefore agreed to. The final question is that motion 5335 in the name of Joe Fitzpatrick on substitution on committees be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The motion is therefore agreed, and that concludes decision time, and I now close this meeting.